This episode of The Ready Room is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
Hi, this is Michael Dorn, Lieutenant Commander Worf from Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Welcome to The Ready Room, show number 222, Dig Your Own Time Crystals, State Park. I'm Christopher Jones, and with me today is Larry Nemecek. In this episode, we'll look back at the second season of Star Trek Discovery as we discuss everything from the Burnham-centric nature of the universe and the use of Section 31 to the power of Pike and the fan-writer feedback loop. And, of course, the battle for attention among magical rocks. So let's step into the Ready Room. Larry, is that you? I finally found you. My gosh, I walked into the Ready Room, and usually when I walk in, you're there sleeping on the sofa because you never leave. But I walked in this time, and you weren't there. So I had to put on this suit. I started running down the corridor. I hopped out of the shuttle bay, and when I hit 88 miles per hour, this wormhole opened. I came here 930 years in our future, and then I found you on the sofa in the Ready Room.
I wondered what that giant rubber band sound was doing, snapping you back. Have fun with hopping around time, Chris. I'm just enjoying the hell out of this little thing. You put this rim on your head and it unfolds a helmet around your head, and then it folds it back, and then it folds it out, and then it folds it back. It's amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah. What I like is the way that the clothing actually just comes to you. It just scoots up behind you.
It's amazing.
And wraps itself around you.
Forget that, and they thought that the blast door was amazing. I say it's these uniforms that fold themselves up and down and around. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm glad we could get back on mic together. We haven't talked since before season 2 of Discovery aired.
Are you kidding?
The pilot episode aired. It actually has been January since we did this.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Time goes by quickly. Keeping two magazines
with or without a Red Angel time
2 weeks apart is tough for me and my schedule. But anyway, we're here now. The season's over. We've watched the entire thing more than once. And I thought it'd be fun for us to get together and look back at season 2 of Discovery.
Well, okay, if you insist. I've got a lot. There's all these specifics that are fun to jump into, but I really have some, and we'll get to this. I have some big picture thoughts and feelings.
Yeah,
I can't remember, me, Dr. Trek. I love to get off on minutia and trivia and fun things, and what we know about production background. I don't remember, even with the first season, I don't remember having so many general feels and tones and things, good and positive and negative, about the season. This where my head is about this right now, what we're going to talk about, is slightly different than I usually am. So I'm looking forward to this discussion, Chris.
Okay, it's an all-new Dr. Trek.
Season premiere this week. Yeah.
You might look like yourself, but you're new, Larry. Even that scar is gone.
It's the right. I'm telling you, Chris, it's the fold-up helmet. It's amazing.
Well, let's start with those basic impressions, initial impressions of season 2. So without getting into the details, after you watch the whole season, what's your general feeling about what you saw and the story they told?
Okay, so first thing, even though it felt like it got off to a fast start and then people had issues with it as it went along, I will still say felt better than season 1. Mm-hmm. My intellectual side says, well, duh, of course, it's more settled. The production's more settled. The well-oiled machine is a little bit better oiled than the rusty startup creature that was season 1. It feels like we can see some trends, but part of this big picture approach to the season is I think I'm still realizing, and I hate to say this as someone who talks about Star Trek and talks about media, hopefully, and I see other people talking, but I still feel like we're still figuring out how to watch Star Trek in the streaming and especially in the serialized age. I think we're still going back to our old feels and vibes, even when we intellectually know what's coming at us, and we've intellectually been through a couple of seasons. I still feel like we're still sorting it out as an audience of different fandom, levels. And I think, not to make excuses here, but I still feel like not so much the design crew, they're good, but I still feel like the writing staff is settling in. And as they branch out into these new shows and people go off to other series or they double duty, I think they're still figuring it out too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when you say that about we're trying to figure out how to watch Star Trek in this day and age of streaming, shorter seasons, very serialized storytelling, even more serialized than Deep Space Nine. Mm-hmm. Do you mean that so many of us still have this expectation of Star Trek episodes as being more standalone? Or do you think we're having trouble with this highly serialized nature of the storytelling and it's not jiving with our expectations of what Star Trek is?
Yes. Not so much about our expectation of what Star Trek is. I think there's a lot of Star Trek notes that are being hit. Occasionally there's an off-put one. I'm talking more about the craft of the storytelling and people feeling cheated. Now, I think there's all kinds of, this whole thing about the nature. And I'm talking as somebody who has not been watching. I did not watch Lost, The Pioneer. Okay. I have not. Mm-hmm. I'm not a Game of Thrones. I'm not a Walking Dead. I could care less about all of them. I have a very limited amount of time to watch modern TV anyway. And there's even been a couple of series that we've watched where, if not heavily serialized, where they have the running arc. And first thing I can pull out of my memory hole here is The Blacklist. Just for, okay? There's standalone episodes, but there's running arcs. And maybe this is me showing my generation here, but there's times when after like a season of that goes by, I think, okay, it was a special season and this running villain or this running plot or whatever. And then it's done. And then, it's not that it's over. It's now we have to invent the new running arc plot. And I just go, really? Is there real life, we have things that mark years in our lives. We have eras in our lives, but it just feels so mechanical with some of these strictures. And there's times when watching other series that I get tired of that. It feels like a device. And part of the finesse and the sophistication of writing, I guess, is to make those things entertaining without being so on the nose. And I know I love watching the Miss Fisher murder mysteries, and I know there have been a couple of those short seasons and there's only 2 or 3 of them, but to the most part, I get the feeling the shows that I paid attention to, the series I had, that it's just like, that's just a device and we have to be trendy and we have to be up with our peers and we're just going to have these running plots and arcs of seasons. And there's just very few series. I say that not having watched all TV now in the peak TV era. But, if that's just a device, then it's going to be a matter of how sophisticated are you and not just bludgeoning us with that all the time. And having said that, I think this season, it's obvious that the 7 signals and then the Red Angel and then what it all meant was going to be a mystery that unraveled. And as we'll get into it here, some of the episodes that stood alone kind of stand out in our minds already as, just as human beings, human nature, we can remember New Eden because it felt like a planet, a planet mission. Or if memory serves, I've just finally put it into my head about memory serves being the Telosians and memories of the Telosians and Vina throwing back. But, and of course the finale, that whole thing about serialized storytelling in a season, unless it's really clever, the standout event of a standalone episode, even a minute arc going by, and a title. And the way we traditionally think of, oh my God, you're such a fan, you know all the titles. Well, there are huge mega fans that I don't know how well they've got the titles memorized yet, It's like I can remember Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad because that's the Harry Mudd time loop show from season 1. And very few of the rest of them I can just immediately match up to, Take My Hand is the last one and Vulcan Hello is the first one. And we're still in a place where it's like making sense of the title.
Well, one thing that would help that, and I hope they do this for season 3, and I've seen, I don't know if it was a real petition or it was just someone tweeting it around at Star Trek Room, but they asked, can we please get titles on the screen?
Yeah. I said that from
3.
Day one. Yeah.
I know some series do it and some series don't, but it's a Star Trek tradition. And I really miss having that title.
I hope by the time that this is pink rayed into 5KD or whatever in 20 years that they'll go back and retcon the titles onto the
8K pink ray.
8K pink ray.
But I was trying to remember the order of the episodes and the titles, and I was thinking, okay, Brother, New Eden, Point of Light. Mm-hmm. Then I'm thinking, okay, is it An Obol for Karen? Is it Saints of Imperfection? Which one came first? Is The Sound of Thunder the name of the Kaminar episode in the season, or was that the name of the Kaminar short? It took me a while, to sort that out, and I'm trying to go through. So I hear what you're saying there.
Yeah.
So my impressions of the season, before I say that, what I wanted to ask you a moment ago, do you feel like there are too many of these arcs, too many of these threads running through a 14-episode season? And I ask that because one of the more interesting stories to me, apart from the Red Angel, the big story, is the Stamets-Culber story. Mm-hmm. And I think that both the actors, Wilson Cruz and Anthony Rapp, have done an amazing job of portraying this story. The chemistry between them feels so real, and I've really connected with the emotions behind this story. But I feel shortchanged. I feel like we're only dipping in here and there, just enough to remind us that that story is going on. Whereas I would like to see it developed more, and I feel like maybe they're just trying to do too much in too little time.
I will say, I agree that the actors have done amazing things, especially given how little they've had, how little screen time they've had to do it. There's only been, it's come to the brink. There have been a couple of times when we saw so little of them, and again, it's not the actor's fault, but there were times because everything was, they were both emotional about all of this. Stamets was emotional about the death and getting over it, and I'm going to change, I'm going to transfer off. And then when they pull Culber back, then of course he's the nutcase because he's come back from the death, and is this the original one or the mycelial network one, or does it make any difference? And then Stamets is wanting him back, and he's got he's pushing off. And then we see him, we don't really see him. It feels like with one or two little mini scenes an episode, 2 if they're lucky, we see him put up the big sad protest, sad for the audience, and see Stamets sad, and then like a blip, and then a blip, and a blip against the overarching action, and then he's fine, and then he's groping his way back to, okay, well, I want to stay with you. So there was a minute there where it felt like, wait, wasn't he just saying he needed his space, and now he's back saying maybe I don't? But they handled it so deftly, the actors did. And I think I would have liked to have had another, even if there wasn't a lot of exposition in those scenes for the mood, just to feel like I was seeing them, because there was a moment, aside from servicing a Culber on Esau 4, which I still say is Fosse spelled backwards, and they're honoring Bob Fosse. So there's some dancer honoring Bob Fosse there. But Esau 4 and the whole facility there, and being behind the force field and all of that, and Culber's got to be there to protect her when she's going to kill herself to attract her mother, or what became her mother. Aside from him being there for mechanics as a doctor, the only time you saw Culber was servicing and maybe bringing somebody in sickbay came back to life when they obviously didn't have Dr. Pollard that week. And he's not even in his medical whites. He's still in his black off duty. But aside from maybe a couple of moments, the only time you saw Culber was in the arc of him, finding his way back to some sanity and back to his relationship
within that
with
arc,
Paul.
yeah.
So, it's, again, not his fault, but I would have liked to have had a little more of that, just so it's not, it's kind of like Manny Coto, the last season of Enterprise, saying, did every episode have to be a throwback to the original series? And it's like, hey guys, I only had 20 slots, and 2 of them were gone, and one of them, it's like, if I'd had more time, I would have been a little more nuanced, but I had to get this done in this amount of time.
Yeah. Well, Culber, he has a good scene with Cornwell where she's being a counselor again. He has a great scene with Jet Reno where she comes to sickbay with a hangnail just so she can talk to him and tell him, don't screw up your second chance. I thought that was a great scene. But yeah, I just would have liked to have seen more.
When I said he needed more scenes, I didn't just mean he needed more scenes with Stem. Like, it was a great scene with Jet Reno and it gave her some screen time. But again, it was really all about
it's within the arc.
Yeah, it's within the arc of his comeback with Stamets,
Yeah.
Colmets? What do they call that? Colmets or Stammer? I guess Colmets is
I see Colmets. Yeah. I believe is what I see most often on Twitter.
Sounds better than Stammer.
Colmets. Yeah. So before we move on from initial impressions and get into more details, compared with season 1, how did you feel they did with season 2?
Oh, head and shoulders above. And so much of that can just be chalked up to birthed in chaos, maneuvered in chaos, landed in chaos. And this season, even with, Aaron
was that
Berg,
a trilogy, Larry? Were those 3 consecutive episodes?
Yes.
Because, we just talked about how hard it is to remember the titles.
That may be. Yes, the Chaos Trilogy.
Chaos Trilogy, yeah.
I'm gonna certify that with the Writers Guild tomorrow. Yeah. Nobody steal that. Yeah. Even though there was some chaos this season, and I was checking back through writers, there was a little bit of departure at mid-season too, besides Aaron, Harberts and Gretchen Berg, being dumped at mid-season. A couple of, you have that all the time. You have writers that come in and they have an option for so many weeks, and do they get picked up after 13 weeks or whatever? Well, that was the old days. Now I don't know what they are, but I saw mid-season. We had a 14 episode season here, and there were a couple of writing changes at mid-season that had nothing to do with people coming and going. But for the most part, it felt more grounded. It's almost like the chaos of the writing staff this time came with the distractions. The good, because of the launch of Picard series and maybe the Section 31 series coming down the line, and people's minds drifting, that way. And people, you could tell there were people coming in and being tested, and the short treks was nice for directors and writers both, and people being given situations and tryouts and that's all normal growth and all that. So this season felt much, much more grounded, although let's get into this, but I feel like even 3 or 4 episodes from the end of the season, I felt like there were a couple of tonal qualities I could see maybe had to do with Aaron and Gretchen's departure. Not catastrophic things, but I went, I saw people talking about things and I went, I wonder if that's just the natural shift of some people aren't here anymore and some people are now here. And one of them being that whole original idea put out by Aaron Harberts that one of the themes this year is spirituality versus rationality in science.
Yeah.
And he's the one that first mentioned that. Yeah, they kind of loop back to it.
Sort of at the end, Pike talks about faith. Yeah.
But it just felt like its mentor went away and nobody was there. That wasn't on somebody's top of agenda. That wasn't somebody's, marching point that was in their mind as they wrote or as these were all edited, as they were, show run by however many hands that is now. But other than that, yes, a much more cohesive. Yeah. And I felt like with all these arcs, like we were saying, I felt like most things seem to make sense. We can get into each episode and find crazy things that, what if they did this or why didn't they do that? But overall, it feels like, because aside from the Red Angel and the suit and the whole time mystery and the 7 signals, you had the Spock arc and Spock, Sarek, Amanda and Burnham, and you had figuring that out and then servicing, Culber and Stamets. And then other than that, it was like servicing, Tilly got a good launch. She had her subplot with May, which was the mycelial creation. And she didn't come back. I just now realized that.
Well,
she went away with
She didn't come back because they fell into the trap of using her as comic relief, which they do way too much.
Yeah. Well, I meant May, but yes, Tilly got more
May didn't
more
come back,
annoying than she'd been in the beginning of the first season at times.
I know Tilly. We can talk about her more when we talk about characters, but a theme there, which maybe we'll talk about in a moment when we get into episodes, is that things started off strongly and then some of those things started to sink a little bit. So my impressions of season 2 compared with season 1, definitely much better, much more focused. I like this idea of having one story that goes through the season and you feel like you're reading a book and you're going chapter to chapter. I like that concept. Season 1 felt very disjointed. It felt like there was the first half and then they didn't know what to do. So they decided, well, let's just fall back on the mirror universe because it's popular. So why not? Let's go play in the mirror universe. Whereas this season, it was a very clear starting point, a very clear ending point. The road to get there didn't always make sense, but as a story concept, it had cohesion. And I think it's built on a very fascinating concept of time travel and the Red Angel, and you have this great mystery, and we get to follow some of the characters through an important part of their life, especially the Spock-Burnham relationship. You talked about Sarek's family as a whole, but even though it was a fascinating concept, it didn't always work so well for me, but there are aspects that I did like quite a lot.
I didn't mean to knock having a through line or an arc of story. I just meant the times when it feels mechanical. And once we start piling up season after season, like the first, I will say, the mirror felt like it was a diversion because they suddenly, I thought that was born out of the chaos of the writers and people coming and going. And like this was going to be about the Klingon War. And well, if we're not hitting the Klingon War every week, how can we divert from this? Oh, we'll go to the mirror universe. I mean, the book has still to be written on exactly what all was going on there. This felt much more cohesive. I'm just talking about after 4 or 5 or 6 years, will it get old having every season just be, and I know they say, hey, they're like chapters in a book and each season is like a book. And I know that's the new little, if that's just the metaphor, then it's how sophisticated, how deftly are you doing it? And I thought this was fairly well done. It's part of what was fun about this year was watching things spring up. And I said this through the year, all the memes that popped up online, if you're an online fan, which lots of people are, even if they're armchair fans, but the whole thing of who is the Red Angel, it threw back to who is Cylon 6, or whatever. I mean, with Battlestar, the second battles, but it was like online world actually had fun. People were having fun with some organic things that popped up there. Much different than the first season. The first season, which just felt like you were lurching from week to week. And even though people went, oh, those mirror uniforms are cool looking, there were bright spots, and then it ended strongly. Oh, look, we finally got some Starfleet speeches, one per episode to wrap up the season here. But this season, one of the barometers of that was watching people actually finding things to have fun with, and that whole "who is the Red Angel" thing. I don't know if CBS designed that, just like we hadn't even talked about Pike yet and Ensign Mount, but just like I think the big thing this year was going to be, oh, Spock, and it was. I don't think CBS was prepared for Ensign Mount and the Pike character to take off like it did.
Oh, I don't think so, no.
So I think some of these things, watching positive things erupt online with fandom that were positives and almost be shockingly, surprisingly positive in a lot of ways, was such a relief and a contrast from the first season. That's another thing that marked this year,
So going back to your point about 6 or 7 years from now, when we look back, is it going to get old having each season be like this one arc? I don't think that will get old, but I do think that if every season we get this one season long arc and Michael Burnham is at the center of everything season after season, I do think that will get old. I already see a lot of fans talking about how tired they are of everything being about Michael. And some people get upset about that and they say, oh, well, it's because you don't like having a woman in the lead, or you don't like having a black woman in the lead, or something like that. And I don't think that's the case at all. Maybe for some people it is, because that's the world we live in. But I think for most people it's not. I think that the reason that many fans don't like that is because it makes the storytelling rather predictable. If you know that the story is about this one character, then, and if you start to pick up on the tendencies of the writing staff, it becomes easy for you to anticipate what's going to happen in the story, at least in the big picture of the story. One case in point, in the first season, it was very obvious that Georgiou was going to be the emperor in the Terran universe. She should have been the empress, right? Because that's the feminine term. But they didn't want to give it away, so they called her emperor at first before they revealed her, and therefore continued to call her emperor afterwards. And then this season with the Red Angel,
it was also a blow for sexual equality. They're entitling, Chris.
That's a good point, and that's why I'm surprised. I haven't seen that mentioned very much, and I was a bit surprised. But this season, who's the Red Angel? It's probably going to be Michael, because the story's all about Michael. Right. So I think if you keep doing this season after season after season, where most of the cast is sort of pushed to the side and we just get like little tidbits of information about them and everything focuses on Michael, I think more fans will start to get tired of that after 3 or 4 or 5 seasons.
And this is exactly what I mean. And as you spun that out, it came to me. This is exactly what I mean about we as an audience and they as creatives, this whole intersection of Star Trek and serialized storytelling. Because if you're going to have a season long arc and you have a lead of a show, then of course the arc is probably going to be about the lead, or the lead is, is like a number one position in the arc adjacent. It's either about them or they're like one step next to it. And in the old days, let's take Next Generation, for example. Well, of course, it was Picard who was Locutus, and that revolved around him and the rest of the crew getting him back. And that was a high point of the show, right? You had that was an ongoing point to revisit, whether it was Hugh Borg or it went into the movies with the Borg, but every episode wasn't about Picard, even though he was the lead. And there were, as it went along, there were a lot of episodes where, Patrick's off guest hosting Saturday Night Live, or he's doing the, some charity thing somewhere, or he's off traveling or doing a movie. And
he was busy running the erotic cake shop on Saturday Night Live. Yes,
exactly. They tried to, in 26 episodes, they tried to have, at least one Riker show, one Troy show, one. Now Data was the breakout star. The Doctor was the breakout on Voyager. They tended to get more shows. The writers gravitated that way. The fans reacted that way. But even then,
Kira on DS9.
Yeah. But on all the episodes, all the series. So Cisco, okay. But DS9 even maybe most famously it was almost like they were slow to come up with this after the pilot just seared that into you. He had so much angst and travail and anger and sadness and tragedy. It's almost like they had to back off of Cisco for a while. I'm telling this to the DS9 podcast host. But so here's Kira to be rich, and it took a while, but finally they stepped up with Bashir and, Quark and Odo, and everybody had running threads. And of course, DS9 famously 40 people had running threads,
Yeah.
So they really spread it around, but it makes me think, and Next Gen, smaller pool of people. But yes, eventually we had the Troy threads and the Troy Riker threads and Data and all of that. And then Voyager 2, and they're trapped. They're really small. But think how if there had been a season-long arc, and I don't even know about 26, even if they were in mini half seasons, if they were only 13 episodes a season, or if they had a chapter 1 to chapter 2, 13 and 13, which is what the Blacklist and others do now too. They call it that way. They refer to it that way. But how would the storytelling of even the Berman era series been if they were serialized with a running arc over a full or a half a season? You wouldn't have that. You would be able to pop in, or if you did, it would be like a New Eden, or it would be like, What's the Kaminar show title? See, here we go. Where we
Sound of
reveal
Thunder.
the Baul, huh?
The Sound of Thunder.
The Sound of Thunder. It would be like one of those. Those are the shows that we as fans can remember. We can remember, you know, or the Telosians in Vina, or if memory serves, or whatever. I mean, New Eden is the planet show, you know, with Terra Elysium. I never thought we'd remember Terra Elysium, but they've repeated it 47 times this year, so now we got it. But those are the episodes that we can remember, because even though the running arc is going through, this happened with the Xindi year on Enterprise, it happened with the Dominion War.
Yeah.
Even when there's a running arc, or there's a 5-layer cake of running arcs, like the Dominion War stories really were, and that's kind of what was going on with Stamets and Culber, and it got squeezed out a lot. The Spock Burnham arc was more pronounced than Stamets Culber underneath the Red Angel and mystery, the Seven Signals mystery. But I'm just saying, that's what I mean about viewing this through a lens. I mean, but I'm talking about they're doing it reverse. Would you have had the freedom to have all these standalone, individualized shows for people? So when people say, gee, Discovery feels like it's like the first season and now the second season, it's all about Burnham. Is that a function of serialized storytelling? Because if it's not all about Burnham, that means that the season-long arc, she has to be, if it's not all about her, then she's got to be one step removed from it, or she's got to be 2 steps removed, 2 positions removed, you know?
I don't know. Yeah.
But I can see that can be the challenge.
Yeah.
Or she gets,
Maybe.
or does she get a bookend, you know, the premiere and the finale, and she gets 1 or 2 in the season, but that's what I mean about it becomes a more deft, you know, a lighter touch on the thing. And maybe there's just a little bit. I mean, I remember poor Voyager, the second season when they tried to do the Jonas arc in there. And I remember Jerry Taylor later on going, oh my God, we botched that so badly. It was just so clunkily done. And those were complete standalone episodes where they inserted, you know, a 5-minute moment or a 2-minute moment. And it was just so clunky. And it was only 3 or 4 or 5 episodes long, 6 episodes long, that led into Seska, you know. But it was that running mystery about who's the traitor aboard the crew. That was like one of the closest things Voyager tried to get to, and in the ancient days of the 90s. And so you know, there's a whole, you can pull this off well or not. But anyway, I people that were saying, because if you just say, well, she's the lead, of course it's going to be about her. Well, you got to look at all the other series where we had definite leads, but you didn't feel that way when you looked at a season as a whole.
Yeah. Well, as you're talking, I said maybe a few times. And the reason I say that is that I don't think that it has to be so much about her to the extent that it is in Discovery. So take this season. At one point, as you know, because I told you behind the scenes as it was going on.
You mean not the stories about her, the universe is about her. Like, she started the Klingon War. She had to talk them into not blowing up Kronos at the end. She's the time suit person that's affecting the entire,
That's the extreme of it. That's the extreme of it, to the point where I think it becomes ridiculous that this one person, especially within Star Trek as a franchise, because this isn't some new science fiction world that you've created. You're working within an existing world that people have been writing for more than half a century. Suddenly there's this character who we've never heard of before, which is fine with me. I don't mind the fact that we've never heard of her before. But if you have this character who we've never heard of before, who is suddenly responsible for everything, like the very existence of sentient life in the future, it gets to be a little bit much.
Yeah.
But no, let me roll it back, because that's not what I was talking about. During this season, it's so much about Burnham that she literally is the Red Angel, or the Gray Angel, because I've seen that suit that she has is called the Gray Angel suit that they made. But I had this theory along the way, and you know about it because I told you about it behind the scenes. I haven't said very much about it publicly, although I will on Notes from the Edge. My theory at one point was that it was Pike's story, and that Pike was the Red Angel. And that didn't make sense to me in terms of what I thought the writers would do, but it did make sense to me in terms of creative, doing something creative, something unexpected, something that tied back into the greater Star Trek mythos. And because you had the whole storyline of Burnham and Spock, and Burnham is part of Sarek's family, so you have Sarek, Amanda, Spock, and Michael Burnham, you could have told a story where Michael Burnham is the lead, and you've got all this rich story going on about her family and her upbringing and how she got from being orphaned when her parents were killed to becoming a commander in Starfleet, while at the same time telling this story about Captain Pike and his journey from the cage to being sidelined during the Klingon War to what we know ultimately happens to him with the cadet training mission, the importance of Spock, because when you think about the menagerie and what Spock did to help Pike, you could have pulled that all together and told a story where Pike is the one who feels the need to save the galaxy. But Burnham has this other story going on with her family, so you could have essentially had two leads going on, and it made sense because you bring Pike in, a character who's only going to be here for one season. Why do you bring him in specifically? Probably because you need to bring the Enterprise in to get Spock involved, but there are creative things that you could do within this framework to tell stories that are less predictable and are richer in terms of character development without sidelining your lead and saying that only this person can be the lead of the show or only this person can be the lead of the show.
Well, and that's why I think this season, again, it helps not to be, showing up every day and having the writer's room blow up constantly and shift around. But that's why I think this season was head and shoulders above the first season in that. And I do think that a lot, I saw a little bit of this on the toxic side of media, of fandom media, but I hope people don't see it as, we fans stood up and yelled and petitioned and screamed and beat them into submission about what they, fix their mistakes.
Which is what I fear might be the case.
Otherwise, otherwise known as, we're looking at feedback and we're, we're going on the Trek Files. We see letters that it's called fan mail. It's like, it's not just send me an 8x10 autograph picture. It's, like this, I didn't like this. And whether it's slow motion paper and stamp mail or it's all the Twitter and the Facebook and all the social media 24/7, it feels overwhelming, just like everything does. But still, someone is tasked, either they're reading it themselves and hopefully they're mature enough and they've been around the block long enough not to be overwhelmed, or they have someone do it for them and filter it if they don't filter it themselves. But that does come back. And of course and maybe sometimes in their bones, they know something's wrong. And what I keep trying to remind everybody, and this happens with the creative staffs as well as the writing, is a lot of times these aren't monoliths. These are collections of 2 and 3 and 5 and 6 and 8 people. And they don't always agree, or maybe someone does and they're quasi outvoted or they're low on the totem pole and they don't bring it up. And then later on, if their position was seen to be right and it's not like they had a fight over it in the room or in the art department or in the visual effects room or whatever, but somebody's point winds up being right, they don't stand up and go, I was right, because they want to work later on. I mean, it's just kind of taken in stride and people eventually get that way. But if an overwhelming tide shows up pointing away, or the other thing is, if thing comes out, forget fandom. If Anson Mount jumps off the screen where you go, oh my God, and we're, maybe the first initial 4, 5, 6 scripts are generated before you start filming. And after the first few days, maybe you never thought about this, but you put Michael Dorn and Terry Farrell together in a Klingon holodeck scene, and you go, oh my God, there's sparks there. We had no clue when we thought about bringing, when Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley start going at it, and you go, oh my God, we never had any idea that this could happen. Sometimes that's just the glory of the creation of the moment, and you have those things happen. And I'm curious to know if the Pike thread, and again, I wonder if the spirituality, rationality was going to be his through line. And I'd like to, now I want to know how far, how much this season was mapped out to the degree that it wound up being. And if a revisit of Vina and the Telosians was part of Pike all along, And the Borth time crystal, if those were late wrinkles or if that was planned all along, because that feeds into his arc. But in a broader picture, if we saw as much of Pike as we were intending to see at the beginning, if that was the original plan, or if that grew because...
Or did they grow the part?
Yeah, or did they grow the part in his role in the arc because his performance and the audience and obviously the show staff's reaction to him.
Yeah.
You know, if that was a happy accident, it was just, you know, which karmically they were so due after the first season. You know, not that we didn't all love Lorca and we didn't love Jason Isaacs, but I mean, in general, you know.
Yeah. It's an interesting question because these seasons are so short and they're being shot and produced and then they're being released. And I might be wrong and you know better than I do because you were there as past series were being produced and you were interviewing people. And also right now you're closer to it. I know that, you know, Rick used to do his little spiel in the magazine. Like, here's what we're working on, you know.
If you call that a spiel, yeah.
But what was in there was we're working on this and we have this idea for this and it hadn't been finished yet. So they were able to sort of adjust and change what they were doing along the way. I don't know how much of that they're doing on this series because of
but also those were one-off episodes.
The way the arc is being written and right, and you don't have the one-off episodes.
Yeah.
But at the beginning of the season, when Pike decides to stay on board the Enterprise, he's talking to Burnham. And Burnham says, "Oh, I understand you're going to hang around with us. Does Saru know?" And Pike says, "Well, you know, he knows. We're going to treat this like a joint custody situation." Well, it didn't turn out to be a joint custody situation. It turned out to be very much Pike is the captain of Discovery. So as you're saying, maybe the original intention was for it to be a little bit less Pike heavy and then maybe
although
they found out, wow, Anson Mount's amazing as Pike, so let's really focus on that.
Let's run with that, yeah.
Maybe.
Although I hear what you're saying and I when you asked me to do this with you tonight, my intention was to rewatch the whole season again. I didn't have the time to, but I did want to go back to the early episodes, at least. And I hear what you're saying right there with that point. That actually happened rather quickly. In fact, there's the moment when they come back from the pod mission and Connolly is killed, the blue shirt is killed. And he even sits down and says, "Oh, no, I'm done. It's your chair, Mr. Saru." And
he says, "My mission is over.
My mission is over." But then you very quickly have the updates. She gets the log entry from Spock and they're off and running with, you know, the mystery of, you know, it goes from the mystery of Spock, runaway Spock, and what actually happened, and it was staged. I mean, I meant one thing I didn't track was, and this is, we haven't even got to the whole AI control Section 31 thing, but I'm trying to remember how far it in. They gradually started introducing and I know the term was in the novels, in the Section 31 novels from all eras.
Yeah,
and those
it's from
have been
David
out there
Mack's novel.
Yeah. And those have been out there for years.
Control. Yeah.
So, but I wasn't coming from that because I had to give up on novels years ago. But it was several episodes in this, just watching the episodes, when I would hear them start to mention Section 31 and Control, Section 1 and 31, it felt like the first 2 or 3 times I heard that mentioned, I just assumed Control was the name for the Section 31 governing entity, like Federation Council or Starfleet Command and Section 31. I didn't know it was this AI program. And then finally, Cornwell says, well, it's a program that we all feed our data reports in and we, you know, it's just our thing. And which didn't make any sense. So I know.
I don't want to be negative and harp on stuff in this podcast. However, the whole Section 31 this season, as you said, they're dropping in Control. They mentioned it I noticed it on my latest rewatch more because I was watching for when they mentioned it. Well,
you're primed to listen to it early on, right?
They do mention it quite a few times before it really becomes a thing. And the first time through, as was the case with you don't pay much attention to it. You just think, oh, well, it's like a headquarters or whatever. And up to that point, when they actually introduced Control is this AI threat assessment program. And then you go, oh, okay, well, this is Control from David's novel. This is this AI system.
And by the way, threat assessment sounds so 21st century, you know, like War on Terror-ish thing. I mean, it felt very contemporary, but go ahead.
up to that point for me with Section 31, it felt to me like the writers, they really did not understand the material that they're working with Section 31 and how Section 31 fits into Starfleet and Star Trek. And it also felt like it was being wedged into this season and overexposed because they needed to set up a spin-off series. That's how it felt. Then when they introduced the AI and they made that the central plot point that, hey, this Section 31 AI is trying to grow so that it can kill all life in the galaxy and we have to stop it.
When it became one of the major tenets of the conflict of the season.
Right. Well, then it's the focal point of the story. So the story as it exists could not exist without Section 31 being involved. But when Admiral Cornwell said, Control, it's a valuable asset. Every Starfleet admiral feeds data into it, and we consider its suggestions when we make our decisions. I was just thinking, wait a minute, every Starfleet admiral feeds information into the artificial intelligence threat assessment system of a secret covert organization that supposedly doesn't officially exist. It doesn't make any sense.
Now you know why there's so many badmirals, Chris.
That exactly. Maybe Leland, he's only a captain here, but if he had survived, maybe he would have been the original badmiral.
Yeah. Well,
I don't want to harp on it. And like, if you want to, I mentioned Enterprise, and I guess in the Enterprise area, they're not officially Section 31 yet, but it's an organization that grows into Section 31, but they're clearly being portrayed as the same organization.
It's called that. It's hyper secret. When they reach out to Malcolm, and but it's part of that is it's pre-Federation, so you can't say, the name comes from part of the Federation Charter. No, they were calling it that.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. So, what some people have said to me when I have criticized the Section 31 storyline is that, in the 22nd century with Enterprise, that wasn't really Section 31, so this is Section 31. And then later, when you get to DS9, they've decided to go underground, which is basically what the writers gave us at the end of season 2 when they said, we need to do a major overhaul of the organization. It's like saying that, we know they're out of control, so we're going to have to drive them underground. Well, that would be fine if Enterprise didn't exist, but I find it a little bit hard to believe, though not impossible, that this secret covert organization existed and then suddenly had its entire own fleet of starships and every admiral is using its resources to make their decisions and then it goes back underground again. That feels like a bit of a stretch for me. And even in Star Trek Into Darkness, it's a very covert organization in the Kelvin timeline.
Yeah,
Kelvin. That's how it's portrayed.
Yeah. Well, I just get the feeling that maybe some of the shifts that happen at mid-season, maybe some of these things were in flux. The size of Pike's role, the thrust, his original thrust, because you could tell the people were it was almost getting a little controversial. Like, they were in the church, and have you ever been, they actually used terms like church and Sunday and whatever in New Eden. It fit because that's how that episode was set up. But you feel like that drifted away, and maybe in this coming and going, the flux of the season as they got into it and had to make changes and adjust for whatever reasons, that maybe the Section 31 wasn't the end game, wasn't meant to be as big an end game gambit as it wound up being. Maybe that wasn't the driving, because the whole point of the end here was the red suit winds up being used. The sphere data becomes the goal of Section 31, and it becomes, sentient, and it's evil, and it's the AI, and all of that stuff. And I mean, I've seen fans go, really? So they would have wiped out the Q, and they would have wiped out the Borg, and they would have, and we had the mid-season thing about, we had the mid-season bit here, which apparently, again, surprised the writers. Although I was hoping it wasn't. But I could it didn't surprise me that given what we were seeing on screen, that this is where fandom went, the audience went, was, they're setting up the Section 31 control to be the bastard. It's the bastard child of the Federation. Haha, it's the origins of the Borg. And then people saying, oh no, but the Borg, arguing timelines, but then saying, well, if you're flipping back and forth hundreds of years back and forth, by then you'd already had the drone from the future. So it's like, well, if that's possible, they could have flipped back and, if you're going to introduce time travel into the mix, then anything's possible. So then it just turned into a thing of, oh, please God, don't have this be I started seeing people say they're increasingly making this a small universe. Can we please not have everything refer back to itself in some way? Yeah. Which was good. I was glad to see them the last weeks of the season start reacting to that and saying, wow, that's amazing. No, we never thought of that. I was like, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Because it wasn't enough time that late in the season to go down that path and go, oh, look at the fan reaction. We better not. Because here's something back to your discussion a minute ago. Part of what's different now, aside from the short seasons, and you were talking about me being around during the Berman era, part of in the mix of what's different and how it's affecting what we're seeing is there's a real whipsaw here that the time between when they're writing and then producing, and the time when these things air, when they're dropped, when they premiere, it's completely off. They're doing the finale as the new episodes start to be seen.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at earlier.
And they're in a complete gap.
How much time?
The writers, the actors, all the staff, you see their 9-month-old Instagram pictures now, which is cool. But it's already a fading memory for them. I mean, things get regenerated, in their memory to see this. But as they come, but they're so far away from when the initial writing, and of course it's filmed weeks and weeks after they write. So, and then it's aired finally. Yeah. So there's so much distance there. There's such a gap in between that, which didn't used to exist. The writers would end up, and then the last show would be like a month later. There'd be like a month lag time. Maybe a month and a half, maybe 2 with holidays. Right. So that's something that's really different. And so now to go back and watch them react to things as they unspool and people see them, I just, as we sit here and try to wonder what's affecting what and what their own flow was and their own feedback loop was, and know that the audience reaction has nothing to do with what they're doing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Season to season it was. And things like, let's see the bridge crew. That was another great thing. Finally fleshing out if you're going to keep them around, then yes, thank you for I feel like I'm setting you up I didn't mean to interrupt the point you were in the middle of maybe, but I know there's another point you want to make about bridge crew.
We're just going with the flow, Larry. We're going wherever time takes us in this discussion.
Just like certain writers' rooms, I know. We're just going with the flow.
I was going to say with the bridge crew.
Yes.
And I think at the beginning of the season, I feel like our friend Kirsten Beyer was more involved. I feel like she's less involved down the road. I have no inside knowledge. It's just my feeling. But the reason I say I feel like she was more involved at the beginning is that Pike stands on the bridge and he says, give me a roll call. I want to know who I'm working with. And then every character on the bridge announces their name. And I felt like that's what a novelist would do, right? Because you're only dealing with words. So you need to make sure everyone knows who these characters are. You need to know their names. You need to be able to associate with them. Compared with season 1, where we had these people on the bridge tapping away at their screens and pushing buttons, but we didn't get to know them very much. Season 2 started with this feeling that, wow, we're going to get to know these people this time. This is great because I want to see more of an ensemble cast. I want everybody to have a little bit more to do.
Right.
And we got that in Brother. We got that in New Eden.
Oh my God. New Eden, they took Owoshikan on an away mission. Or excuse me, a landing party.
Right?
I'm like, my God, what this show is breaking wide open, which I think is another thing that added to people's positive reaction to
That's great. And that's why, as I was doing my latest rewatch, I said I adore New Eden because New Eden felt like an old school Star Trek episode, but at the same time, it advanced the story.
Right.
You talked about the Xindi arc earlier, and in the Xindi arc on Enterprise, we had episodes like North Star.
Right.
Where they go down, it felt very much like a TOS episode, but it was still advancing their mission in the Expanse.
And I've forgotten the Dearborn Street, the one where they go to Detroit. They time travel back
Carpenter
to Detroit.
Street.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So you had those moments, and New Eden felt a lot like that. And so the season started off so strongly, and then we got to An Obel for Karen, which I thought was just an absolute structural disaster of an episode. And I've rewatched it many times since, and it's grown on me a fair bit. But structurally, it's still a mess. That's when the sphere comes for the first time, and everyone starts speaking in different languages. And there are so many interesting ideas in that episode. The whole, Babel-like aphasia language mix-up thing, that's interesting.
Which we've seen before. That happened once on the original series.
Right, and it happened on DS9. That Babel is the episode.
Well, but the aphasia, but I mean the outside entity comes and people are blathering in different languages or hearing things in different languages. Right? Yeah,
right. And the sphere itself, the idea that there is this object that's been collecting information for 100,000 years. Very interesting concept. And here's a thought on that. And I think many viewers had the same thought. At the end of that, when Pike is sitting in his ready room and he's listening to some of the information about galactic events from tens of thousands of years ago, and he says it's like we found our galaxy's Dead Sea Scrolls. And you start to think that this is how the Federation knows so much about galactic history, is that in the 23rd century, they found this object that contained all this information about galactic history. But then when we get to the end of the season, we find out that this data can't be moved. It's part of Discovery. It's part of the ship. And it can't be transferred anywhere else. And we're going to send the ship 1,000 years into the future, 930 years into the future. So the data went with the ship. So they don't have that information anymore. Maybe some people wrote some of it down, but it's not like they actually have the entire Sphere archive downloaded somewhere else. It's not in Memory Alpha, the actual in-universe Memory Alpha.
Yeah.
But New Eden. So Brother I thought was great, and then New Eden was a wonderful episode. And I had such high hopes that this was going to be a somewhat more familiar Star Trek. Because Pike tells Burnham when they leave his ready room at the end of Brother, wherever we go, we'll try to have some fun along the way. How much fun did we have in this season, Larry?
There was, people kind of went yippee a couple of times.
A couple of times. Linus was fun. Linus had a good time, I think.
I was really, you talk about initial that, because they loved that scene. They teased that scene. That was a promo scene. That was a trailer scene for the season. The sneezing on, future dead blue shirt guy, Connolly. And I was going, oh God, this is their answer to the Orville. It's like, this is somebody go, we gotta have to have, but then I liked the scene in the mess room, episodes later.
That
when they
I really
it's
liked.
like they had the entire recurring cast at the tables.
Yeah.
And I went, oh, okay. And they had, and they're all playing synonyms or antonyms or whatever it was. Yeah. I love how they're all doing it in English, but since English is galactic standard, okay. But
they're playing like an antonym game where they it's words that have opposite meanings at the same time. And
one word means its own opposite. Yes.
Yeah, and the one Linus gives is oversight. But he has some great lines. Like Jet asks him, "Are you ready?" And he says, "I was hatched ready."
But isn't that those are the only two times we saw him in the sneeze scene and then that, right?
There's another scene where they're analyzing data and they're gathered around and they're looking at one of the holographic projections, and he actually talks a fair bit in that scene. But he's not in there enough. Okay.
There's one scene, I was going back through looking at some of the frame grabs I made. There's one scene on the bridge where it's like every single person that has been heard or seen this season was all standing on the bridge together at one point. And I'm like, oh, wow, this was like, it must have been a call day.
That was group photo day, Larry. That's when they told everyone, like, everybody gather on the bridge. Quick, we're going to take a photo of the whole group together.
As much as we still haven't got to Airiam. And I know you want to talk about Airiam and the actresses, but we still haven't got the one thing that bugs me about, we're going to get into all these people. And somebody pointed out to me the other day that they think they were among the Hiawatha crew that I want to say Tig Notaro, that Jet Reno. How can I not remember Jet Reno? That Jet Reno was able to save a couple of dozen, whatever that was these two guys. But there's like these bulbous head, multi-eyed, the big head aliens, and there's like two of them, and one is like bluish in the face and one is reddish in the face. And there's times when they've been standing almost next to each other. There's at least one episode, and I made some frame grabs where they're there, but it's like and I know there's a makeup nickname for them out there. It escapes me at the moment, but there's been nothing said about them, but they keep bringing them back and they keep popping up, and they're often working on the bridge together. Like, I don't know, is this like, like early day Binars or something? I don't know. It's something like that where we have to work within 10 feet of each other or we're no good. Or whatever. I don't know. But they're always
they're like low powered Bluetooth. They have to be really close together to communicate.
You thought the Binars were like Borg light. These are like Binar light. Or whatever, but aside from
it's amazing that those two guys work together, Larry, because one's red and one's blue, and on their home world, the red guys and the blue guys, they don't get along at all.
Can't you see? He's blue in the face and I'm red in the face. It's the most obvious thing in the world. Yes. Thank you, Riddler, for telling me that. Yeah. No, you want to say something about Airiam?
I do want to talk about Airiam, but before we talk about Airiam, I just want to know from you, and you can describe the episode if you don't have the episode title memorized yet, Larry. But
I'm trying.
What else stood out to you as like strong episodes this season that you really connected with?
Oh, past. That's what's odd about this. Past New Eden. Mm-hmm. And I think, it's almost like the original series. Oh, the Roman one. Oh, the Nazi one. Oh, the Western one. And I think of the Telosian one, which was, if memory serves. A lot of them are still, most of the rest of the season to me, and I shouldn't say this, with repeated viewing it won't be quite this distinct, but most of the rest of the season, I just think about the ongoing arcs. Now, there's the Boreth one. Okay, so there we go. There's an episode that really sticks out. It's almost like
Through the Valley of Shadows.
Through the Valley of Shadows, as it should. It was just really odd, somewhere between Game of Thrones and Middle Earth, and it's like, oh look, we're gonna turn the creative staff loose. We're gonna run the Klingons through this medieval filter, and everything you thought you knew about Boreth is going to be, that was fine. And the idea of getting L'Rell, that was one thing. After we had the big Klingon episode, which
Point of Light,
thank you. Which I remember had that was almost a throwback to the controversy of the week, because people were so upset that she faked the baby's death and not just Voke Tyler, but the baby's death. And people were all upset about that. And I'm like, wait. We went through a whole thing here about the Klingons not being, getting too bland, too vanilla, too homogenized, too anglicized, too humanized. And here they're being, even though they've de-discoveryized their heads and look, and that was a whole side issue too that kind of went away. I think people settled into that pretty quickly. But, they obviously changed L'Rell a little bit, but it's within that. To me, it's within that 10, 15, 20% or whatever. I'm not going to get hung up on that. And I was glad to see, as the season wore on, we saw species diversity. We actually, by the end of the year, we even saw TNG-looking Klingons there at the end, especially on our bridge at the end. But that episode, I never thought about. I had just seen, one of the Shakespearean plays that's very bloody, where they're cutting heads off. But I got a chance to tell Mary Chieffo about this too, in the middle of the controversy. But the fandom erupting about, oh my God, I can't believe you cut the baby's head off. It's like, well, it was fake. And B, let Klingons be Klingons. Let Klingons be aliens,
That's what Mary said.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even before I heard her say that's what I was, that was a throwback to the days when I would wake up in the morning and go, oh my God, what's fandom saying now? Really? I saw there was so much less of that this year, but that was like one of the throwbacks to it. And And then to find out that, okay, they'd done this very, Shakespearean Games of Thronesian thing of squirreling Tyler away and squirreling the baby away on Boreth. And I thought, oh, how cool. Monks, Boreth. What a great way to circle back and pull that up. So later in the year, back to this episode, oh, well, you know what? They're not just clone keepers on Boreth or future clone keepers. They're time keepers. I'm like, okay, that was in the other wing of the monastery. It's like, this is the clone wing over here, and this is the time crystal wing. And people were, and then the side thing about people kind of like choking on saying time crystal all year long, which I was too. And then people go, but Harry Mudd said it back in the short treks. I'm like, okay, who cares? And then people said, but it's a real thing. It's coming out of real science. And I'm like, okay, but in Star Trek, we would call it a temporal crystal, or we would call it a chronoton crystal, or something.
It's not coming out of real science functioning the way it does in this story.
Yes. Well, neither did the Spore
time
drive.
Crystals, there's a kind of crystal and how they change over time. Yeah, that's a real thing. But putting it inside an angel suit so you can jump all over space and time, that's not something that's naturally growing down the street here.
To the green thing sticking out of rocks, like you're back in Arkansas at Crater Diamond State Park or whatever. You can go down and dig your own diamonds out of the dirt. It's like what? Yes. Shout out to the Midwest there. But it's like, that was just a little, that whole, it's overshadowed and it's saved by the way Anson Mount sells the experience. Yeah. That's the saving grace. That's what blots it away. But while you're in the moment watching that episode and having, Tavanek, whatever his name was, and it's hysterical they get Ken Marshall back, who to me is still Deke Slayton from Astronaut Wives.
I know, he's playing like every character, right?
Well, they have the same actor playing every Tellarite, the same actor plays every Andorian, but anyway. So good on him.
Tenavik is his name.
Yes, Tenavik. I was close. And it was completely different than, even playing, his original character's father, whatever. Okay, that was clever. I get
Cole
that.
And he's Cole's dad, right?
And this was different. No, I got no qualms on that. I'm just saying that his like two henchmen are doing the whoosh whoosh, like it's the witchy. Yeah. What's the horror franchise where people are zooming around weirdly mysterious like that, where there's some kind of supernatural thing going on? Is this, because first I was like, is this the supernatural Klingon episode? What is this going to be? And then it just turns out to go in and dig your own time crystals, State Park. It's like, okay.
Larry, again, you go in there and there's a basket type thing there, and you put in your 10 quatlus and you get 60 minutes to dig your time crystal.
Darsex. Yeah.
Yeah, actually the Klingons want Darsex, don't they?
Yeah.
And you go in and actually however many time crystals you can dig in 60 minutes, you get to keep. But the catch is they're time crystals. So 60 minutes to one person is only a minute to someone else.
That's true. If you're an alien baby dumped on Boreth, you too can be an adult. I was like, it was like, okay, I'm going to see your Alexander and raise you. I'm going to see your token alien baby birth on Star Trek who becomes they become a teenager in 1 year because they're alien mix. Well, I'll see your teenager and raise you to young adulthood. Okay. He's voting age already and he's running that monastery. So the time crystals, I really did not like the time crystal element of the story. Yeah. And it quickly became it became the MacGuffin and the slap it in the back, and now Jet's got to charge it up, and we were running around like it's a liver that's coming in for a transplant. We're all running around. Yeah.
Well, if you go back to season 1 and Harry Mudd and Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, he had some sort of time crystal like thing to make that work. So it wasn't completely out of nowhere.
But it was a Harry Mudd story, and I didn't care because I thought it was just Harry Mudd being stupidly unscientific. Yes.
Exactly. It's a Harry Mudd story, so just go with it. But here, as the critical item that they need to move this story forward, for that to be something that's essentially magical, like something you would find in Lord of the Rings, it doesn't really feel right for Star Trek. But if we're talking about other episodes that are strong episodes for us, Light and Shadows which is when they finally end the Spock chase, TM, as I call it. And Burnham goes and she finds Spock, and Amanda has hidden Spock away in the catacombs. And Sarek comes in, and he mentions another rocky stone-like thing that I think feels really jilted and overshadowed by this whole time crystal thing. And those are Katra stones, Larry. You know, if you don't want anyone to be able to find you or read you, just line the walls with Katra stones.
You're right.
They block out thought.
And here I thought Katra stones was like, you know, why if you're a disembodied memory waiting the hall of ancient thought, you know, but if you're having, you know, they have, those have to be maintained and kept. They're not just sitting in that wall. They're, you know, the hall of ancient thought. They're not just sitting there waiting to be adopted into a new body or whatever, big library. They're not just a head in a jar like Futurama. You know, they have their own problems too. And every once in a while they get a little ill and they need a visit from a Katra doctor, because every once in a while they pass a Katra stone and, it's sad, but you know, apparently they're being harvested and used for AIDS as Vulcan mind control, because they recycle everything on Vulcan because they're so damn logical.
Yeah.
When Katra stone flew by, I was like, well, I'll see your time crystal and raise you a Katra stone. You're right. Yeah. Thank you.
The difference, though, was Katra stones, I didn't pay much attention to it. It was sort of like, okay, well,
apparently
Katra
no one in the
stones,
writer's room did either
whatever.
After that.
You know, that's fine. Then you get to time crystals. And then when you do a rewatch and you get to Katra stones again and you start thinking, okay, we've got Katra stones and we've got time crystals and we've got like all these little magical solutions to our plot problems that are coming up.
Well, roll a 20-sided die and tell me what you... Yeah.
So these things stand out to me. They don't ruin the story for me. They're not something I lose sleep over. But as a lifelong Star Trek fan, if I'm thinking about, do these really make sense within the Star Trek universe? Because one reason that Star Trek has connected so well with me compared with, say, Star Wars or some other franchise that is set in space or has social commentary to deliver, is that it feels real. Like it feels like it's based on an extension of our own world and our own knowledge. And of course, there's future science. You need that.
Right.
But the future science has most of the time, not always, but most of the time, been grounded in real science. And here we're starting to introduce things that really don't have any basis to function the way they do in real science. And we're using them to move our story forward. That is a little bit disappointing to me. It shifts the Star Trek universe a little bit away from the real world feel that has always made it so important to me, and a little bit more towards a fantasy world. A
little too. I mean, there's always been MacGuffins, but they felt a little, They felt a little 2019-ish.
But Light and Shadows, while we're talking about episodes, I really enjoy that episode. I love the interaction with Burnham and Spock. I like watching Spock try to figure out things in his own mind. And then I love the ending when Michael figures out that the numbers that he keeps spitting out over and over are reversed because of his dyslexia, and then figures out that those are coordinates. And then when the computer says it found a match and it's Talos 4,
and everybody melted
that's
down.
That's a really cool connection.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, again, there's a case where Anson Mount and Pike almost are so good in that reaction and seeing that, even though it feels like, is he having this accident in 2264 or is he having this
so you're
in
jumping back to the Time Crystal episode now.
Yes, I'm going back to that one for a second. It's almost like that's cool, but what I'm just talking about is he takes over whatever trepidations you had about the setup, as we talked about. He and that scene really sells it. And the aside of, I love seeing the cadet, the baffle plate go away on the Class J ship, cadet ship. Although, of course, they're doing it in Discovery Look. And for a minute, I was like, wait, did this happen in 2264 or 2274? This looks so post-motion picture. But anyway, that ship has sailed. But in the same way, Katra stones and all of that, you're blown away by the scene you were just describing. What got me, and I had to kind of step out of my own skin for this, so I was intellectually appreciating this, but I know it resonated with the audience once again when, my God, if you're going to layer in, I still say that one of the biggest, because of Michael, but really not just Michael, but Sarek and Amanda and now Spock, what it's done for the Sarek family in the bigger, some of the key moments for me of season 1 that were lasting. I keep saying, what are we going to think about this in 5 years? What are we going to think about this in 10 years outside of the plot points? And one of the biggest things for Trek overall and Spock's role in it is what it said about and the whole thing about Sarek having 2 chances to get his kids into the Vulcan Science Academy, and through his own machinations, he messed it up for both of them. And that was like the biggest wow. That was Lethe or whatever the episode was first season. And this year, the revelation that, Spock had Vulcan dyslexia. And was that part of his mixed, it was common, they had a name for it, so it existed among other Vulcans. But the fact that they laid that in, and, we had the whole factor of so many brilliant people had been somewhere on the autism scale, or they had some kind of a mental, or they were brilliant as a youngster, but then they had a disease or a mental affliction, something later on. But where the people who are not, who are atypical in some health issue are some of the most brilliant minds, the most giving minds, and not that it's been completely debilitating, but just to layer that in on the Spock character after all these years. I just know that had to reach out to a lot of people who struggle or people who have overcome it. And just the whole thing, representation is not all about, seeing women and seeing minorities and different races and ethnic groups. We've got the crewman in the wheelchair. That's kind of like on the nose. But to layer that in about Spock, and again, that didn't really resonate with me directly, but as it went by, I intellectually thought, oh my God, that's got to be touching an awful lot of the audience out there. And, for what it's worth.
While we're talking about Spock, I was going to ask you this towards the end after we talked about all aspects of the season, but maybe now's a good time because you mentioned what this story did for Sarek's family and what it did for Spock. And you often talk about adding texture to the Star Trek universe. And there are many...
Well, texture
novels,
as an answer to, they got that wrong. Well, no, just go with it as the exception or the...
Well, I think of it as texture as, adding more detail to things that we already know something about in a way that makes those richer for us.
Makes it more real.
So,
right.
A DS9 example, a TOS DS9 example would be you watch The Trouble with Tribbles, and then you watch Trials and Tribulations, and then you watch The Trouble with Tribbles again with it in the back of your mind.
And it's forever colored your understanding.
Somehow the DS9 crew had to intervene in this, and it doesn't necessarily change the episode for you, but you just know there was a little bit more going on, at least in one timeline, than there was the first time you saw it. But for characters, there are novels and there are comics that you read, and it adds something to the story for you. For example, comics that fill in the gap between Space Seed and The Wrath of Khan. So then when you watch The Wrath of Khan, you have a little bit better understanding of why Khan is so angry at Kirk.
Right.
And it adds richness to that character. Granted, the comics are not canon per se, but if you read them, you make them part of your headcanon.
Right.
It works for you.
And to be fair, over 50 years, there have been eras. There were 80s comics, and there are comics of the last... I mean, there could be even... Thank you, Memory Beta, for tracking different eras of backstories.
Right.
But yes, point taken, yeah.
So, with Spock, and I'm especially curious about how you feel about this because of, being a TOS guy, given the ending of this season, when you come away from this, do you feel like this story truly added texture to Spock's character and to the Sarek family? I felt that way along the way, but then we get to the end and they decide we're never going to speak Michael's name publicly again. And no one's ever going to say anything about Michael Burnham or Discovery or any of this stuff that ever happened, given the fact that essentially the writers erase this season and the first season from history at the end. Does it still add the same texture for you when you think about Spock? When you watch Spock stories that come after this on the timeline, are you going to be thinking about what happened in his childhood with his foster sister and what happened in this season?
I haven't really thought of this yet. In the moment, like I mentioned the moment in the first season where you got that dynamic of Sarek's little, machinations with the Vulcan Science Academy and how it blew up in his face twice. And what happens when Spock finds out how Michael, even though it was his father doing it, that just adds to why Spock is so pissed at Sarek. And, I thought, well, this is a great way to retcon something that wasn't just mere trivia. It's a D7. Oh, okay. But, and I don't mean there, I mean back in Tribulations, actually. But actual character. And that really struck me watching. That was the highlight of the first season for me as far as contributions to overall Star Trek's background canon. And this year, it was just these details about Spock and some of the dynamics in him personally. And to have gone through all this. Now is Spock going to carry around the whole Seven Signals nightmare? I mean, both those kids, put each other through hell in their own ways. But as far as what you're saying, I don't think I've had time to wash over it yet. I haven't had time to watch Journey to Babel or Star Trek 3 or something and have that reverberate with me yet. I don't mean to be a cheat here. I'm trying to sincerely say.
I'm just asking.
I know a lot of people were pissed.
Now I put that seed in your head, and now let's see in the future.
I mean, in a broader way, people are just upset about the whole ending being, oh, really? They're all going to run around and keep a secret? Where my head keeps going to, and we talked about this on the other side of the room before we started, was from day one, people are saying, well, what's the Spore drive? We don't ever hear about this later on. Well, that was fairly easy. It didn't have to be a secret. It could have just been a big flop, and no one had nothing we ever saw recorded on film. No one ever had to stop and say, well, you know what I was thinking about last night? I was just thinking about that wacky Spore drive they tried in the 2250s. We were having
drinks, and that Spore drive thing came off.
Hey, wait, is that a mushroom on that replicator menu?
We ordered pizza, had mushrooms on it, yeah.
Did you ever read anything about that Spore drive?
Down at Jet's Pizzeria.
Yeah. It's like, what? Okay. Yeah. Or maybe 7 people enjoy their Klingon war history and they think about this. But my point here is I never worried.
They reenact it, actually, Larry, in the park. They reenact the Klingon war. And they have one person who's the Spore jumper.
This person is really great at like doing a quadruple axel, sideways, laterally.
Yeah. Beer and mushrooms in the tent.
Yeah.
In the refreshments tent.
Well, actually having mushrooms is an aid to being able to do the quadruple axel laterally. In the park. But no, I was never, it's like I went, okay, you're upset about the Klingons. We'll go to species diversity. Don't worry about it. Okay. You're upset about, the Spore drive. It will be a catastrophic Look, it's already killing. If you don't have a tardigrade or a guy that sticks tardigrade DNA in his arms because he's bizarre. Yeah. He's a wacko scientist, mad Dr. Frankenstein here. If you're going to kill somebody to make it work, then it's obviously not going to have a future. So, I wasn't ever worried about people like, oh my God, we've got to explain why no one ever talks about it. It's like, it'll happen. Don't worry about it. The fact that they felt like they had to dedicate this year to explaining that. Now, one of the things going into the second season, again, this is an Aaron Harbert's thing saying, we hear you fans, and we're going to talk about, what's the number one thing we hear? Why have we never heard about Michael before from Spock and Sarek and Amanda? We're going to answer that. Well, okay, boy, that was a way to answer it. Like, that was on the nose. But I never thought about the Spore drive being caught up in that. And I was saying,
but a lot of people did.
Yeah. And the fact that it was one thing to say, okay, Michael, I thought it was a little heavy handed, but okay, look, it's easy. I mean, my God, maybe this is what took Amanda to an early grave, because she obviously, I don't know how much longer she lived past Star Trek 4, past 2286. How long was it? I guess there's a century before Sarek is with Perrin. So who knows how long he wasn't married? Did he have another wife? No, he says 2 wives. So how long Amanda lived, and then how long he was a bachelor, and then when he married Perrin. But so it may have taken a toll on her. But boy, Sarek and Spock themselves, the whole Vulcan, we've said this many times, the whole Vulcan civilization runs around and doesn't tell its best friends anything, much less Spock individually.
Right.
So for them to carry this secret to their grave, I can totally see that happening. What gets me is, and what we were mentioning other side of the room, was didn't Starfleet have this big public medal ceremony for the Discovery crew? Didn't they, aside from hopping around during the war, so the mirror universe has to be classified because of Mirror Mirror. Okay. That I get. That'll let it go. But does anybody know, did they classify the fact that they jumped into the middle of Kronos, a planet, so they could map it from the, I'm like, how many, there was the Glen. How many people were involved in coordinating with the Glen and the Discovery at the beginning? How many people were on the periphery of seeing them pop in and out of things? How many Klingons knew that this was going on? How many were in L'Orel's camp? Although L'Orel could keep a pretty good secret because Ash is on her ship at the end and nobody seems to bat an eye. So I guess she had her 3 most trusted secret keepers there with her on her bridge of the Cleve ship. But I just thought that at the end of the Klingon War, at the end of season 1, that the Spore drive wasn't a big secret. It was their big weapon. And it wasn't like they blathered it. It wasn't like Section 31 and the whole world knew about it. The whole galaxy knew about it. But I didn't think it was this huge secret. So at the end of this season, to bind up Spore drive, because people felt it had to be dealt with that way, in with the whole Michael Burnham secret, felt like overkill to me. Like, isn't the cat out of the bag on this already? So anyway, that was one thing that was kind of off-putting to me.
So I have thoughts on both of these points. So first,
what really still makes me mad, Chris, is I want to know why they're not talking about Sybok.
I know, where is Sybok right now?
Now I have an answer for that.
I really want to know that.
He says with Perrin, Sarek says, I've been married twice. So what that means is the quote-unquote Vulcan priestess, who was Sybok's mother, they apparently were never married. Hey, Sarek could have been a young guy. And I know Sybok was, 10 years older than Spock or whatever? Or he was older, even though Lawrence Luckenbill was actually younger than Leonard Nimoy when they shot 5. But so was, my God, Mark Lenard was basically Leonard's age, playing his dad. But bottom line here is if Sybok is that thing we don't talk about, part of the family. Look, you've already found a family of secrets, and we like to say, Spock never mentioned. Why did Spock never? Same thing happened in 89 when it came out. Why has Spock never mentioned this guy? Well, because it's a crappy part of the family he doesn't want to talk about, and he doesn't talk about that. But the Vulcans don't talk about why are the Vulcans 200 years after first contact and 100 years after being allies? McCoy has no clue about Pon farr? And I know it was part of Enterprise, but secrets. Ferengi, Borg. But I'm just saying, the Vulcans, this isn't you're putting your natives on other ships with mixed crews, and you're not telling the medical staff how to deal with your people and some of their most basic. So, the Vulcans are great about hiding everything from their friends.
Larry, that's why everyone gets transferred to another ship 6 years into their tour of duty. You got to get them out. And if it's 6 years, 11 months, you really got to get them off the ship. Because otherwise, the cat's going to be out of the bag.
It's the equivalent of the 30s, of the poor teenage kid going, "Mama, we just got settled in this town. Why do we have to keep moving on?" It's like,
but how do you know that there's not a house?
Roll up your window here in the station wagon. We got to move on to the next town, Jimmy. Susie.
But Larry, how do you know that there's not a house somewhere out there on the Forge where Sybok's in the living room, Michael's in the living room, and there are 6 other people in the living room that Amanda and Sarek and Spock never talk about?
They took us in for a while and they threw us in the house on the Forge. Yeah, Little House on the Forge. It was a huge, huge secret Vulcan bestseller.
There you go. So my thoughts on both of these. The idea that Sarek and Spock can go and never say anything about Michael, given how secretive the Vulcans seem to be about things. Yeah, I can buy that. That's fine. But as you said, the humans, the Klingons, everyone involved in building those ships, the idea that no one is ever going to say anything. And it's as if these people, all these crew members and this ship and this technology, none of it ever existed. That's just not going to happen. That's not.
Well, this is how people shoot down the worst of the tinfoil hat conspiracies. It's like, really? How many hundreds of people had to have a hand and had knowledge of this? And really, all 547 of them, no one talked. No one ever said anything.
Never said anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing about the Spore drive, they had the opportunity after season 1, coming into this season, because when we start the season, the Spore drive is being decommissioned. And they're going to convert the engine room back into a normal engine room. So they had an opportunity there to just say, yeah, it didn't work the way we wanted. We're shutting down this project. Then later, when May shows up, they have another opportunity to say, the technology works. We can't deploy it across the fleet because we need Stamets and he can't be everywhere because he's not Admiral Cornwell. He can't be on every ship all the time. Every time you show up, Stamets can't be there in the engine room.
With a counseling schedule on every ship she does in her spare time. Yeah.
And because of the fact that May says that these jumps, these incursions into their realm are killing them, it's harming them. It could be like in the Next Generation where they decide you can only go warp 5.
That's exactly what I was going to mention. Right.
It could be like that. This is damaging the environment, so we're not going to use this technology. They could have done that. They had that opportunity this season, but instead they continue to use it. And then at the end, they could have said, hey, now that we've saved all sentient life in the galaxy, and we know this technology is hard to deploy and it damages other realms, let's just mothball the whole thing. But instead, they decide that the probably tens of thousands of people who know about it in some capacity will never, ever, ever speak of it again. And that's why we've never heard of it. And that's why Voyager couldn't use it to get back to the Alpha Quadrant, which is what a lot of people point out when they say, hey, why have we never heard of this before?
Much less the 100,000 years of data might have had species along the way on the way back. No, as you were first talking about this, I was thinking about the disruption of subspace and the warp 5 speed limit and all that. Because it structurally and storytelling wise, it was the same thing. It became a big deal at the season break, and we're dismantling it. But it's like we've answered that question, and now it's really, and if you couldn't tell it was coming down the pike, oh boy, sorry, no pun intended, that here it is in plain sight. Here's why the Spore drive will not be around in the future, and no one talks about it because 99.9% of the world doesn't need to go back and remember wacky technologies of the past that didn't work. I mean, we're concerned with the here and now. But it was there so that when it popped up like when they had to get to Boreth halfway across the Klingon Empire, they Spore jumped and they had to get there. When they had to go to Terralysium.
Terralysium is 51,000 light years away.
Oh, right? Can you get, and not only did they go back and use it, it was almost like a joke. Because you'd gone through this whole storytelling arc of how, Stamets was going crazy at the end and he was sick and it was floozy and it's going to kill him, or we're going to have these we're going to be in this, and we had the episode where we're half in and half, which I love, by the way, that effect. It was bizarre. It was like watching the Poseidon adventure. It was like the Discovery adventure when they're sliding into the mycelial network. It was bizarre. Yeah. Everybody come over to the starboard side and we'll, anyway. That was a little strange and wacky, but it actually worked. It was bizarre and they staged it well. But by the end, it was like we got to go to Boreth, or we got to go here. Okay. And then it overlaps back into the Stamets-Culber arc where it gives Culber an excuse to go to engineering and go, oh, hey, Oh, what are you doing down here? Oh, I don't want to say that I care and I'm changing my mind back, but I'm going to use an excuse to come down and say, oh, hey, how was the Spore jump? Oh, I'm fine. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. It's almost like it's a joke to get them together for their scenes to keep going. It's become such an afterthought that this thing almost killed him. Oh, but the last time or two when they jump, because as the season went along and they would go somewhere, I'd go, what? And sometimes they would cut away before they physically showed the ship effect, the spinning. And sometimes they was like, wait, sometimes they would leap off to somewhere and I go, whoa, was that a Spore jump or was that a warp? Did he say warp 5? Again, it was like telepathic turbo lifts. Wait, did he give a command when the scene ends on a dramatic note and they're going somewhere and no one says warp 5 or warp 2 anymore or lay in a course or do black alert if we're going to Spore, we're going to jump. But the times when they would actually say Spore drive, it was as the season went along, it became less and less a thing for him to be in aside from a time around the time of May and then which we've barely talked about, that whole little side arc for a couple of episodes, May and then retrieving Culber, which you had to think, was that really set up as, what was that there for? That was there. In the end, all the 7 signals were like, it was like the trail of breadcrumbs to make the whole puzzle come together. And I'm sure that having May and the mycelial network and all of that was a thing to get them back together. But it also turned into the device, I think, the number one thing that they wanted to fix. Because I don't think the day they wrapped the final draft of killing Culber, I don't think at the moment they said, now, we're of course bringing him back next season. I think that was just a done thing. And then I don't know and I don't know how long it'll be before we actually, if they will own up to it or if anybody feels comfortable enough in their skin to say, you know what, we realized that was a mistake and we immediately had to look about bringing him back.
I always felt like they were going to bring him back. I didn't believe that he was going to be gone.
I would like to think that, but they were so definite with the way they shot it.
But you would want to be if you wanted people to buy into it.
Yeah. Anyway, we don't know.
For me, I always thought the moment that his neck snapped, I thought, he's going to be back. And I always thought the way they're going to bring him back is through the mycelial network. And that's exactly what they did. But I don't know, they wrote themselves a story this season that necessitated the Spore drive. Without the Spore drive, they could not tell this story because they spread the locations so far apart.
Chris, exactly. When they showed that again, I went back to the first episode because I wanted to see when Pike is first running in and we're busy taking in Pike and the uniforms and the new people. And oh my God, is she a Barzan back there? What the hell is that? Mm-hmm. And oh, look at their uniforms and oh, he's clever. And oh, Spock is hanging over everything. And they're talking about simile. There was so much happening there at the beginning. And then they're in these crazy pods and oh, look, here's the anime part of the show now. And is it going to be like this all year long? And, are we going to dupe, is this like the scene from Star Trek 09 where they're flying through space like this is for the Chinese market? It's like, what? But going back and listening to the exposition about that, where he actually lays out the first bits you get, 4 or 5, I didn't do that at first. I did just now. But 4 or 5 or 6 episodes in, it started to hit me. Wait a minute. They have a chart of all 7 of them flashed at once. They're talking about waiting for them. Didn't anyone scan them? And you go back and he says, okay, they all popped in and popped out and, they were gone except one stayed and that's the one we're going to first. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But then it's like, well, what is that? That image, Federation sensors picked this up, but you're constantly seeing it there and it's laid out on a 3D graphic of what you think is the whole galaxy. Well, at first
they know where they all are.
Well,
right?
yeah. And not only they know where they are, but the way it felt like here's it looks like a spiral. It's the galaxy spiral. Here's the core. Here's the outer rim. And what hit me the first time I saw it was, my God, half of these signals are like beyond the rim of the galaxy. Like they're outside. Yeah. Now, that was literally looking at it, and you have to retcon that because it couldn't be. Because the first, when if you watch it, the first one that they hang on to and they isolate in on is like the one that's in the foreground, but it's like one of them that looks like it's beyond the dense populated part of the galaxy. And if that's the one they're going to first, they don't Spore jump there. they just go. And I'm like, wait, what? You're going out? You're going that far? This is like going to Delta Vega again, only in the other direction. I mean, it's like, what?
Well, Larry, at least they didn't all grab their personal transporters and just hop over there.
Yes. So my headcanon became that was not a literal representation of the entire galaxy. Yeah. And then at times it bopped back and forth between what? Is this the snapshot that Starfleet picked up? It's like, how do you, if it was just there barely, but we know this one, then what are we looking at? You can't know that this one was kind of over there and this one's over here. We can slightly deduce. We can be a sector or two away.
Yeah. Okay. So,
and then how much of it was Spock's memory that came, then it all kind of got blended in with Spock's log entry and his visualization of his nightmare when he was younger.
That was Spock's podcast we were listening to.
Oh, yeah. Well, Spock started video casting, doing a vlog, and,
yeah.
Cause you look at his star date on they say within, he says months ago, Pike says months ago, Spock, he shifted, and there's actually a star date on it, and it actually kind of puts it back. Oh, that's a whole other side topic, the star dates. I was so proud of them for retconning star dates, and now they're like all over the map. They don't make any sense. But you got the idea that this was a few months ago. So then it's becoming, well, now Spock's, and plot-wise, look, Spock had this image, and he drew it, like Spock in his art time with Bob Ross. Spock drew this, and look, it's exactly, I guess the point was Spock's image from his nightmare is exactly matching up with the snapshot that we took, but not good enough to be able to determine coordinates, I guess so. That's what was getting hazy to me. And after a while, they were so far along on the plot, like no one was even thinking of that anymore.
Yeah. I'll throw this out there because I'm sure people are listening to us going, guys, come on. You're taking everything so literally. Obviously, for the screen, they've got to give us some kind of nice representation that looks pretty, and
that's the only way out of
signals.
it. Yeah.
And that, that's what you have to think about when you watch it. If you try to think of it too literally, then of course it doesn't make any sense. You can get into the science and say, at the end, we get a rundown of every star date where Burnham went and she set the signal, and she set them in sequence. Well, light has to travel from that location to you, so there's no way they're all going to light up at the same time. Well, that just isn't how nature works.
Guys, you're getting so literal here with the.
So you can't take that approach. Otherwise, you can't enjoy the story and you can't follow the story. But I hear what you're saying. For sure.
No, I'm saying it was a confusion factor. I remember 4 or 5 episodes in going, wait a minute, they keep flashing on this image of the 7 signals. Why don't they just go where they are? And then you backtrack and you go, okay, fine. They're reflashing. And then by the time you get into the whole bit about it's her mother bopping around, on her concentrated path. And then Michael is overlapping her own mother, and there's her set of signals. Okay, I get it. And yes,
okay. To that point,
I say, Chris, I say this though, knowing that the graphics people are doing a great job of using our charts. You saw them 2 or 3 times in the year. You could actually read star names. You could actually the chase for, what'd you call it?
The Spock chase with a trademark.
Yes, symbol. Spock chase trademark. You could actually read the stars. He crossed over Klingon space, and when they talked about Starbase, whatever it was, is the one that's in the anyway. I won't go in the weeds, but there was a lot of wonderful stuff doing. So if I was holding graphics to a little higher bar, excuse me, because they've actually been doing a pretty good job with it. So
the graphics, the whole visuals of this show have been phenomenal. It's beautifully produced.
Well, they are pretty, but I'm talking content canon wise.
You're talking about accuracy to past established.
A pretty face this is way more than a pretty face on these graphics.
Yeah. So when Pike tells them that everything lit up, we saw it for a moment, he says they were spread across 30,000 light years.
Yes.
But then Terra Elysium is 51,000 light years away.
Yep.
You've already got a discrepancy, and maybe you can explain it like from this signal to this signal is 30,000 years from the farthest on this side to the farthest on this side. But we're over here, and we're 51,000 light years away from that signal. You can maybe explain it that way. But it's one of those things that pops out to you like, wait a minute, I thought that we were dealing with this region of space or this distance, but now here's something that's almost double that you've thrown out.
Well, and remembering everybody, what's happened just here like last couple of months. So the Galaxy disc, or as I did on Trekline Tuesdays Live 2 or 3 weeks ago, I used a couple of plates to talk about this. Mm-hmm. And now I had people say, can I have the official Galaxy prop plate set, Larry? Mm-hmm. Can you sell that? The Galaxy disc of the plate, the horizontal planar view, is supposed to be 100,000 light years across and then about 10,000 thick. So it's like looking at a plate from the top or looking at it from the side, right? It's thin. So when they threw out that 30,000, I'm like, wow. If you cut it into fourths, like a clock face, if you're looking at the disc from on high, and it's 100,000 across, well, a radius then is 50,000 at the most, but most of the quadrant is 50,000. So 30,000 from if they're near Earth or in the local space, 30,000 can be way into the beta quadrant or way into the gamma quadrant. And that's why when they came back and said, or the second signal or whatever was 51 and something, right?
51,000.
Yeah, 51,000. Yeah. I went, they're making a big point to say this is clear over in the beta quadrant, which they did. And I was so proud. Another reason why I love New Eden on top of the other 47 reasons. And then they had to spore jump there, right? So they got off on that pack. So I was just going to give them on the 30,000 at first. I was going to say that was part of the momentary. We barely got a glimpse of it and we didn't get a good fix. It was so far away.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
Because overall, I thought they did an awesome job of that. So.
Yeah. All right. So, you kept asking me about Airiam.
Yes.
I wanted to talk about Airiam.
I thought you just decided you weren't going to talk, but since I goaded you.
Well, I was thinking maybe I won't talk about it, but we brought it up a couple times. So, but you and I talked about this on messaging, and you were a little bit surprised at my reaction, and maybe I'm the only one who feels this way.
Well, I just didn't understand. I never did understand what you were concerned about.
So if I didn't know the whole backstory about the actress swap, maybe I wouldn't have noticed this and I wouldn't feel this way. But this whole thing, it took me out of the story a little bit. I thought it was something that could have been handled with a bit more finesse. We have Airiam. She gets a few speaking lines leading up to Project Daedalus. And then Project Daedalus becomes this backstory of Airiam, so that they can kill her at the end of the episode, and we're all supposed to feel really upset that this main character has died when we didn't know anything about her prior to this episode. But that's a bit beside the point. I knew that they had changed actresses. So Sarah Middich had played Airiam in Season 1, and they had changed to Hannah Cheeseman for Season 2.
While showing Sarah Middich playing a new character.
But barely.
Well,
like, you see her like standing in the docking bay, or you see her standing around. You see her here and there prior to this point in the season. But she doesn't have any kind of major role or anything going on. And you're building up this stuff here with Airiam. Then Airiam dies. And as soon as Airiam is gone, then Sarah Middich's character, Nilsson, strolls onto the bridge, and everyone looks at her with this kind of odd look. And she goes over to Airiam's station, and she takes over Airiam's duties on the bridge. That was, to me, really strange. To know that the actress that had been playing that character had gotten out of that role, had a new role, and then the character gets killed off, and then the same actress comes in and takes over the same role on the bridge. And the reactions of the bridge crew as she comes in, I felt were a bit odd. And from that point forward, every time I see Nilsson in this season, I have this sort of strange reaction. I find it really odd that it almost felt like, I don't think this is what happened, but it almost feels like we know this character is going to die. We want to keep this person on the show, so let's recast the character so we don't lose this person.
I think that's totally what happened.
Let's send that person back in.
I think that's totally what happened. We really like the production The writers, actors, crew all say we really like Sarah. And now we've decided. And at the beginning, we had no clue. We threw all these crazy concepts on the wall, to see what sticks. And at the beginning of this season, they finally come up with something to you as they plot out the arcs of the show of the season. They go, "Oh, we're going to have this AI." There's another case for maybe they had that more planned than they thought. But let's have the AI take over. Hijack her bionic bits, if you will, and she's killed off because she's been around for a year and a half. I mean, the other end of that is what you said, people complaining that we're supposed to feel a lot for her when we didn't know her. That's true. And a lot of people said, well, I don't care. She was there and that didn't affect me. Yay or nay on that at the beginning of the year, if they knew 8 episodes in, she's dying, but they want to keep Sarah around because she's been around from the beginning. They go off and hire in the vacuum. They hire Hannah to come in. Maybe they'll even tell her at the beginning. Oh, by the way, now I've seen conversations and interviews with them where Hannah says, oh, and Sarah took me over and showed me what she had done. And so there's continuity in the portrayal and all that. Although they're so, I mean, it's under this, goofy, it's not an android. It's under this goofy robot mask. She's 95%
She's a
covered.
cybernetically enhanced human.
Exactly. Right? Although over the first season, people kept saying, what is she? And they'd say, oh, she's an alien. No, she's a human. No,
that's because the writers didn't bother to tell us anything about her.
Yes, exactly. So it was still a slate to fill in, but I'm just saying that.
Yeah. Well, so not to belabor this point because it's not really a big issue. It's just something that I noticed, and so I thought I'd bring it up.
I think maybe no, she was not on. Sarah Nielsen, whatever, was not around. Yeah. I know it's spelled Nielsen, but I thought I heard them saying Nelson. Like, is that how Swedes pronounce Nielsen? They say Nelson.
I heard it as Nielsen, but it may be either way. I don't know.
But basically, what I'm saying is her function earlier. She was in 3 or 4 scenes, mainly where she was, for lack of a better term, Tilly's assistant on the docking bay.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the lab. Yeah. And she had 2 or 3 moments.
And that's the problem, is that she was like that until Airiam died. And then suddenly, from that point forward, she shows up a lot. And I just felt like there was a lack of finesse in how that was handled. It really stood out to me. I just thought that they recast because they really liked Sarah and they wanted to get her out of the robot makeup and then make another character out of her who was going to have stuff to do like Detmer and the other characters do. And that didn't happen. And we only really start seeing her after the character that she had previously played is killed off. That I thought was a little bit weird. Now, Hannah Cheeseman, I thought, did a phenomenal job of playing Airiam and playing a cybernetically enhanced human or robot. I thought it was amazing. That actually a very difficult thing to do that she did. And I was very impressed by it.
Yeah.
I just found the overall, the connection to me, it did stand out a lot.
Well, the other thing, a factor in there might have been, and this might be with Rachel that plays Nine,
yeah.
There may be a stunt performer quality in there that if they were going to get into that eventual drama scene, that eventual rough scene, that they wanted somebody that had maybe had some, and I didn't even look to see if Hannah, it just occurred to me, if Hannah had some stunt background work too. But
yeah, that's a really good point. All right. Okay, I just thought I'd bring that up since we've talked about it and you were wondering, like, why do you think that?
Yeah.
So now you know my feelings on that. Is there anything else in terms of production on the writer's side or the directing side or anything like that you've seen unfold this season that you found interesting?
Well, it's just interesting to watch the show, not just this show keep evolving, but knowing, like you were talking about Kirsten Beyer, she's gone over to the #Picard show.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to mention earlier, and I didn't get around to it, but talking about Kirsten you mentioned in this season that you really liked the episode where they go in they go into the mycelial network where the ship is sort of sideways and it's halfway in and it's halfway out. That's Saints of Imperfection. That was Kirsten's story. She wrote that. And then you mentioned earlier in season 1, when we go outside of the planet, the CV Pacum Parabellum, that was Kirsten's story.
Right. Yes.
So like visually, the styles of those stories they both had this sort of kind of unusual quality to them. If you remember the energy on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I just, for lack of a better term, they were just very science fiction-y.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought
so
brought a new, they got out of, they weren't out of the Star Trek mindset. They weren't out of the Star Trek groove, but they didn't just live there. They actually went out and took a new quality and gave it a Star Trek sheen,
Yeah.
In a way.
Okay. So go on with your thought.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's just interesting watching. They're coming in like some of the obviously Jonathan Frakes had 2 shows. Tunde, they call him by his nickname, but Olatunde Osunsami, he's a producer director, so he did the 2 finales. Hanel Culpepper, who's done a couple of episodes this season and last season, is doing the first 2 hours of the Picard show, which is 10 episodes, and they're going to treat them as 2 hour. I don't know if it's strictly like a 2-part, but they're looking at the 10 hours in 5 2-hour blocks. And she's directing the first 2, and Jonathan's directing the next 2, and on down the line. But watching some of the, like, Bowie and Erica, as writers, they seem to always write for the shows that Doug Aronofsky is directing, which I don't know what that is, but he's a director. And then I just noticed tonight that he's already listed as a co-executive producer on hashtag Picard series, as I call it, till we get an official name, not as a writer, but on the production side, because they've had, Michael Chabon, who won a Pulitzer for his future history stories and then made news when he was writing the short trek. He wrote, wasn't it Calypso? Yes. Which was kind of the most ethereal future history, and who knows how that ties into what they're doing with season 3 on Discovery, but wrote that, and he's in the mix for hashtag Picard show. So Michelle Paradise comes in halfway through the season. There's a writing partner. So no, it's interesting to watch the evolution of people, for lack of a better word, coming and going. Ted Sullivan was a holdover from first year. Bowie Kim, Erica Lippold, holdover from first year. Gretchen Aaron were holdover until they weren't. Sean Cochran was a holdover from the first year. These are all writers. A producer, Von Wilmot, who was listed as a co-EP, apparently was only there the first half of the season, was gone later. Andrew Colville you talk about all these executive producers and co-executive producers and all of that, and some of them are writer producers and some of them are producer producers, and they have different roles. But you can tell if some of those EPs, executives and co-executive producers, wind up with writing credits, and they're a writer. Because those terms, it's the same way below the line with like Kirsten and Sean Cochran at the end. It's just a ladder. This is just the guild and the writer. You can go back and look at your Next Gen and any of those era shows too. It's the same thing. Not so much the original series, but from the 80s onward, at least. If you're a junior writer, young in your career, the longer you hang on, whether you're at a show or you go somewhere else, it's almost like teachers getting tenure. It's like if you put in a year or 2 or 3 after a certain amount of time as a staff writer, your title expands. And co doesn't mean, I'm sharing with somebody else. Co is like a co-executive producer is a rung lower than an executive producer. And a co-producer is a rung lower than a producer. So, story editor, executive story editor, that's all just ways you climb the ladder. And then at a certain point, you get out front on credits and you're above the line, meaning you're getting residuals, where anybody who's in the final credits is not getting residuals for a show. So whether you're an actor or your crew. But some of these, they're getting into a pool here of David Barrett, this Lee Rose. They're also hiring a lot of, like Lee Rose is a woman. Marta Cunningham's a woman. Hanel Culpepper's a woman. These are directors. TJ Scott is a man. He's Canadian. Had directed on Orphans and Black. But you can see they're really big on they're putting their diversity to work behind the camera as well. Maya Vria, I'm not sure about her name, who directed a short trek. She directed a lot on Gotham, and they've used her more than once. So it's a cross between hiring diverse, hiring from some of the latest shows as far as the directors go, and having their favorites back that they know work, like Doug Aronofsky, like Jonathan. and Tunde, Olatunde back, who's on the regular staff, who's a regular producer and also directs. So it's just interesting kind of watching the trends there. Oh, one of the most interesting things was, and it's just kind of like knowing how the writing industry works. So the Red Angel episode, which was actually like the the one after she's revealed, after Project Daedalus, the writers are Chris Silvestri and Anthony Moranville. Chris Silvestri was a writing assistant, basically like the secretary, the assistant for the writers' room to one or more of them on the first season. Anthony Moranville was their researcher, who I guess was kind of in the Joan Pierce, Kellum DeForest realm, who was a researcher for things. And then they were that way for first season, left those jobs, but apparently have decided, at least then, we're going in together partnering as writing partners, and sold the story and did the script for Red Angel. So that's like a little saga where I can see here's two young writers who want to be writers. They're working in different tracks. One's an assistant, one's researching. They left that job. They're probably out trying to go full time with their writing, knowing that their friends at Discovery hopefully may buy at least one story from them or put them on assignment for one story. And it didn't look like they had a lot of credits, but if they're young writers trying to build up their resume. So, it's like we can see what's happening for Discovery, but also just interpreting some of those signals and seeing what's going on. So this Dan Dvorkin and Jay Beatty, who I'd like to talk to, wrote If Memory Serves, the Telosian and Venus show, if they're old fans or not. They apparently came in for the second half of the season as consulting producers, is their title. Apparently they're partners, and they've written together before on other series. So still young in their careers, but coming in at that level. And Michelle Paradise, who now is going to be the main showrunner on the ground, probably let Alex Kurtzman go back to spinning out new shows and overseeing the new boys coming, the babies. Again, she comes from a acting background, an improv. She was a Groundlings member, but she wrote Project Daedalus, but she came in mid-season. There's a thing where they give people a chance and they give them this, goes back like Jerry Taylor had a tryout script. Michael Piller had a tryout script. They see who sticks. Maybe it's not even with an idea of a future. They're just trying to get assignments made, especially back in the 26 episode days. And if somebody really does a bang up job, whether you're looking for somebody, it's like, oh my God, you totally get the show. And Star Trek was always so hard to get that those people stuck out. And that's apparently still happening here. Maybe they got a specific tryout. Maybe it was a happy accident. Maybe they say, hey, I really think they can do this. But you can see where people may have had a test script and then came in, or maybe they even were big on a short season and said, hey, you got 8 episodes with us as a producer. Let's see how your writing is. And then if not, we'll let you go. If you stay, you stay. And she apparently, blew him off the charts and jumped into being the showrunner for next year. So anyway, I just thought this bit of Chris Silvestri and Anthony Moranville had been, they were obviously one to be writers and had these. That's the thing in Hollywood. It's really good for business across the board. I've always had a dictum. If you walk in an office and you're really there to see somebody else, it's like, don't ever shortchange the secretary or the assistant out front, because in 5 years or 10 years, they could be running things. And, if they're not only the doorway to the person you're trying to see, you never knew where they are, where they're going to be down the block. Terry Matalos was Brandon's assistant for years, and he winds up selling and running 12 Monkeys, a big hit show. So it's cool to see that happen too, because you remember them when they were just a little kid sitting out at the front desk in their 20s, and now here they are, later on. This Brandon Schultz, who was around, who co-wrote, Alan McElroy was a producer second season, but Brandon Schultz was another writer's assistant the first season and wrote with him on Perpetual Infinity. Well, I'm hoping there will be more stability. I don't know if there will be, because just of the nature of the business, people do, as you say, come and they grow, and then some stay around and some move on. But I'd like to see a really solid season where the writing feels like it isn't being the result of shifts that are happening internally as the season goes on. Yes. This season to me felt a lot more stable than the first season did. And so hands down. Maybe third season will as well. Even if we, as you said, we were so excited the first 2 or 3 out of some of that may have just been surprise shock or Christmas morning shock that the first episode or 2 or 3 felt so much better, like anything. And I hate to say anything's better because the first season ended much better than it began. We all knew that. I
enjoyed the first season, but it did feel like 2 different seasons.
Right.
And overall, it didn't feel like the Star Trek that we're accustomed to.
Right. Even though you could kind of see an evolution, you felt better at the landing than you did at a lot of people felt better. And not just at the styles and the choices, but just the organicness of how unified the show felt with itself. It just felt like it was a more comfortable place at landing than it did.
Which you would expect.
Which you would expect. Well, you expect that on a Nova Curve, much less with the chaos they had. And I just think that you said some of these resulting episodes further into season 2 felt not as satisfying as the early ones did, but a lot of the goodwill and momentum, it's almost like, well, you've set the bar higher. You showed us what you could do. Now get back to that. And again, part of that may have been a little bit of the casualty of Gretchen and Aaron being shown the door, but, things shift and things go along and it's not going to be poured out of the mold all year long. But it's nice that it was the opposite of the first year. There was so much ill will from so many quarters, like the headwinds to get across. This one started off exactly the opposite, where it's almost like the goodwill out of the gate, and people were blown away by Ensign Mount, and that was an unexpected surprise. And then some of these little fun things like "Who's the Red Angel?" kind of started kicking in, and there was just so much more of a positivity this year that it may have coasted along over some of those. The positivity may have nursemaided us through some of those difficulties, mister. With some of these resulting, there was a stretched metaphor throwback quote of mid-season.
Well, if we head into final thoughts, because we've already well past 2 hours.
Yeah, I realize.
I think you and I could probably talk about this for 5 hours and not cover everything. But you just mentioned how Ensign Mount really grabbed everyone right out of the gate and got everyone excited. But I want to point out Ethan Peck, I thought did a fantastic job as Spock. I think all of us were probably, especially all of us really old-time fans, were a little bit nervous going in about someone else playing Spock, but I thought Ethan Peck did a fantastic job with Spock. I love Mia Kirshner's Amanda Grayson, and I love James Frain's Sarek. And really, this entire cast is extremely strong. I think that when I think about all the different Star Trek series and I think about all the casts on an actor-by-actor basis, what is the best cast of actors that have been assembled? I feel like this cast is on par with the DS9 cast as being the strongest group of actors that we've had in Star Trek. And I feel like they really bring everything to every episode, to every scene. And I really enjoy watching them. Even if I don't always agree with the writing, even if I find some lines a bit cringeworthy sometimes in the dialogue where I wish someone in the writer's room would go, maybe we should massage that line a little bit. Can we
finesse that a little bit? Yeah, on the nose?
Yeah. But the cast is amazing. Leading up to this season, for me, it was Doug Jones by far as Saru. It just blew me away. And he continued to blow me away this season. But Ensign Mount, really, I was not expecting that at all when he came in and playing Pike, and what we got was amazing. And also, I just want to point out Liam Hughes, who plays the young Spock, is the cutest thing ever.
I don't think I was quite, and this is nothing about Liam. I don't think of Spock being, because I think of the Vulcan body type. I don't think about Spock being quite that, maybe pudgy, and I hate to say, maybe that's not a PC word anymore.
Though, like the eyebrows and the hair and just the general look, that they took a lot of that from young Spock in the animated series?
Okay, well again, I love the season. I love that and I love the young actresses that played a young Michael.
Arista Arhin, yeah.
I just thought of all of these and nothing against the young man playing the part. I just thought of all of them, just visibility, just the appearance. Yeah. I just thought that the one that was a little more off the mark than anything else was the young Spock. But
okay,
because I am thinking of yesteryear, and I just, he's a little older there too than he is in this. But
maybe, but at least you're comparing a cartoon and a real person there versus a real person and a real person. But I just think he's adorable.
Oh, he is adorable.
I love every moment he speaks on camera. I love it.
Well, considering that the open, and I was especially rewatching those scenes again, one of the things about Brothers that was throwing all these mysteries at you, but one of the most bizarre was him being younger and why he was being so stoic. And then that whole thing of there's a whole thing called Vulcan 3D Kids.
Yeah,
animation art weird, was bizarre, but it was alien and futuristic, and at this. And then I was like, was that a LaMotta that he just threw at us, or was that,
Yeah.
No, we see that later. But
that was a bit odd.
Yeah.
But
people laughing about the IKEA Vulcan house. But no, it was.
So my final thoughts to continue beyond the actors being wonderful. I know we broke down a lot of things in our discussion today, and we are critical about various things, but you and I are both creatives, and we both write, and this is how we think. We create things, and so we do notice things, and I think like most creatives, we always feel that whatever we make can be better, and so we're thinking along those lines, and that's why we talk about those things. But as I said up front, I think that the concept of the season was really fascinating, and it is a really fun ride. I enjoyed it, which is why I've watched all the episodes 6 or 7 times, and will continue to watch them as I prepare notes from the edge. But there are definitely things in here where at times I feel like if they had a few more episodes, they could stretch things out a little bit more and everything would feel a little bit better, and they wouldn't have to gloss over so much stuff, and we wouldn't have to just take it on faith to tie into the original theme of the season, which got lost along the way, that things happen off camera.
Right.
I think that there was too much stuff in this season that we were expected to just assume happened off camera, and we should have been shown some of it. And then there are also a lot of cases where just one line of dialogue could fix a plot hole, fill a plot hole. And the writers just, maybe because in their mind they already know how it all fits together, they just assume that we also know. But one thing, as you and I know being editors, is you cannot assume that the reader or the viewer knows things. You need to give certain pieces of information. And I think that was missing quite often this season. And so I feel like we got this really fascinating and fun story that could have been even better because the acting is top notch and the visual effects and the set design, the costume design, everything is absolutely top notch. And if some of these little details had been paid attention to, then the entire season could be even better. That's my general feeling, but I, of course, enjoyed it. So how did you feel, Larry? What's your final thought?
No, I did. I just feel very much aware of, not that I hope I'm not slow, but that to a deeper degree, I feel like wondering how much longer it's going to take before I feel real confident about serialized story watching, these arcs that are put together. And if I said something early on about not wanting an overarching plot going through I didn't mean that I didn't like that concept. I just meant it set up a bar for how are the writers dealing with it, and I don't like obviousness and that kind of thing. One thing that I did think first season and this season that I think was maybe not quite as was a downer from first season, even with all the problems that happened, was this season, there were times when I felt like whether it was on the ship or just in general in the universe, I just felt like there was things weren't always planted. Things weren't always scoped. And there were times I would kind of wake up in the middle of something or look up and go, wait, where are we? And how much time has gone? I mean, I laugh about the telepathic turbo lifts.
The passage of time is a mess in this season.
It is,
How much
because
time
all of a
does it
sudden
take for
you have 2 or
anything to
3
happen?
shows that are obviously sequential. They happen right after each other. And then 2 or 3 more come by and somebody says, oh, that was, thank God. We hadn't even talked about Jet Reno and Tig Notaro, really.
And I wanted to talk about the D7s, but we'll do that some other time too.
But there were times when we would have, obviously, you could tell by the plot, sequential shows. I mean, the last 3 episodes hang, bang, bang, bang. But before that, we get times when things are fairly sequential. And then there's a moment in dialogue. I mean, I remember after 3 or 4 or 5 episodes went by, because I'm thinking how the Klingon War was to kind of chart, and it's a little hazy.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not even giving star dates as they did go back and retcon some in, but which not always makes sense even. But there's just a big kind of free floating formlessness to time and space. Not to make a pun here, but about where things are being grounded in time and place. And there's times when they would be flying from here to there or within the shows or show to show. And there's a scene and all of a sudden someone says, well, it's been months since that happened. I go, oh, it has? Wasn't that like 3 episodes ago? And that's been months? Because the Klingon War ended in 2257. And finally, some of the, I noticed Memory Alpha, but this is me doing it on myself. When the last episode bridged those, 124 days, whatever, it's like, okay, well, if that's 3 months, they've got to be into the next calendar year.
How long passed after?
Yeah, they've got to be in the next
jump,
calendar year by now, much less how that relates to star dates. But I'm not doing it as an anal factoid thing. I'm just saying, what is the time going by? I mean, the Klingon, the first season, for all its, inconsistency and chaos, did have a grounding about how things were advancing and how many months are going by. And they would kind of pop up and say time passing. And you had no sense of that. And at first, I thought this was all going to happen over a couple of weeks. I thought I'd heard that. I thought the plot of this was happening. But apparently, no, it happened over several months. So,
and I think that if you don't pay attention to the star dates, the perception as a viewer is that this all takes place over the course of a couple of weeks. But then they do drop in these lines about how a few months ago this or a few months ago that.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, that and then the time and place. Here's the thing that I love going back to. In the very, how did this all start? Pike is there because Starfleet had sent, we find out that they held him out of the war, which I wanted to go, well, where were they that they weren't? Does it mean you're at Earth? We're just keeping you under a big blanket?
They were chasing comets, Larry.
Yes, yeah.
Because Starfleet felt that for Pike to be in the battle, might not be the best idea.
He was being held in reserve. But regardless, when he was listening
to his Berlioz.
Yeah, they were scanning particulate matter along the neutral side. Yeah. But they what's weird here is, and this confused me a little bit the first few episodes, because when number 1 popped, Rebecca Romaine, number 1, we didn't say anything about her. I kept going, surely she's going to have more than that one scene or those 2 scenes in that one episode. And then she came back and nailed it, and that was great. And even had a little bit of a sarcastic lilt. I could actually see Majel being kind of sarcastically Majel in some of the writing they did for her, which I didn't know where that came from, but anyway, at her best. But my point here is, that whole opening scene of, the thing that started off as the season 1 ender, we're just going to get to the end of the first season and we find the Enterprise. And then it was like, okay, now what do we do that we're there? Oh, we have to create a new art. We have to this isn't the ending point now. It's the beginning point of the new season. And the whole thing of them being disabled, and it's the start of the 7 signals. He was on the way when the ship went down. So he's coming over to Discovery basically to take it to go on his mission. But what had just happened? They had all been at Earth getting their medals, Discovery. They had been in Paris getting medals and had left to go to Vulcan to get their captain. That's all that happened, right? And Sarek was going home. They had him and he was going home with them. What are we talking about? We're talking about from Sol to 40 Eridani. That's like 16 light years. Like, we're talking close in on the home worlds, right? That whole initial, oh my God, it's the Enterprise coming up to us. Here we are. Oh no, he's coming aboard. Now we're going to take off after the first, and wherever that was, wherever the dark matter asteroid was, we're going to take off and go there at warp 5. I made sure to notice that. But this season starts off like in downtown Federation. And so then whenever they would go back to number 1 comes aboard, when they look out the window and see, which was a very cool effect, the Enterprise being towed by 2 tugs with tractor beams, which was very cool to see. Yeah. That's all back in like very hardcore inside space, right? Like the way down south in the we're not out in the boonies in the Federation. We're way down there. So this whole thing about when they would loop back, and then at the end when they would loop back and get, when they picked up the Enterprise at the end, they were back down. You get that. And then obviously when they're at Boreth, they're over at Boreth. And when they're over in the Beta Quadrant at Teresium, they're there. Those times were kind of grounded. But wherever Section 31's former disguised jail planetoid was, and a couple of the other moments in the season were just kind of floaty. And somebody might say, well, who cares? Well, that's fine. And eventually we'll make sense of this when we hopefully get to update stellar cartography. But I'm just saying there were times when it just felt like time and place. Again, not to play anal fanboy with it, but it just felt like things were floating, both time and place. And I just wonder if that's a casualty of being so worried about the serialized storytelling and cramming the story and trying not to have things be on the nose and having it be a little finessed, that was a casualty. But and something I think that's what it is. Like you've got to move everything along because you have a limited time. But I'll just point out, for anyone listening to you, and I think anyone listening already knows, but in case anyone doesn't, the fact that you create the star maps, the stellar cartography book, is why you notice this stuff so much more and think about it so much more. Well, I had a funny moment. This has nothing to do with stars. The moment when Cornwell does her impromptu therapy session with Culber. Yeah. She's sitting she's at this desk and he comes in and they kind of, this is the same episode, help me with the title, where he had wandered into engineering, and it was it was one of the funnier Tilly moments where what just happened? And it's almost like Culber, that's where I was like uncomfortably watching Culber come back from the deep end, right? Yeah. And he walks in to try to talk to him and leaves, but Culber's cover is, I was looking for Admiral Cornwell. And it goes right past because it's the Georgiou Tilly Culber scene. He comes in, they have the moment and leaves. She has her funny bit. And then later on, it's like, oh, he really was looking for her. He's wanting to talk to her. He wants some unofficial counseling. Okay. But when he walked in the room and she was standing there and they kind of went that way, I was like, wait, where are we? This is, again, the time and space thing, only this is inside the ship. It's like, wait, did she get her, did they give her an office? Did they give her a counseling room? Is this the other end of this immense, this is another room with the Clampett's mansion ready room that Pike moved into? It's like, what is this space we're in? And then she's looking out she's got an outer thing with the warp stores flying by. It just made me stop, and that's where it all hit me for the whole season. Where are we? Where have we just been? Where are we going? Where is she? What's happening with her? The show, and of course she's not in every episode, but it's like, is she just, later on she becomes a rebel, so she's with them, when they're on the run. So I get that. But before that, it's like she just showed up to join their quest, and so they're going to give her an office anyway, it was just, but Larry, Cornwell, she has such a room on every starship. That's her portal. That's how she pops in. Okay. There's like a secret door inside that room on every ship, and she just steps in and right through, and she's there. That's how she appears on every ship, no matter where they are. I had no idea she had a little Iconian in her, Chris. I didn't know. Okay, silly me. Yeah. Her original surname actually is I Cornwell, but she wanted to keep things secret, so she shortened it to just Cornwell. That's you know what? I think I'm just going to go over here and start playing with my little fold-out helmet again, because I'm just so fascinated by these things. Because I had no idea they existed 10 years later. Yeah, of course they do. Of course they do. Well, Larry, there is so much stuff that we haven't talked about that I wanted to talk about, and I think you wanted to talk about. So who knows? Maybe we need to get together and do like a part 2 of season 2 or something, but for right now, beat part 2 to death even more.
right?
Season.
We're way past 2 hours, and I think people probably have other things to do than hear us ramble on about Star Trek Discovery. So let's wrap this up. But before you go, everyone, this isn't the only thing we've been talking about here on the network. So here's a quick look at some other things you may have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, Earl Grey.
But just really in a most passionate way he could, in a compassionate manner, he goes to him, "You are not alone. We're here to help you to do this together." And that means so much to me. Like, I guess being the youngest kid in the family, so I kind of think, that like you don't want to be left out. So that feeling where no one's listening to. But to see Picard really reach out to him, and he wants to help him with all his might, but there's just there's that divide with him not being able to speak or hear.
Melodic Treks.
Eventually, the screen goes to white, and then you cut to Ripley's ship that's been derelict for 57 years, and there's this very lonesome-sounding string melody that's playing. And I don't think it's a direct lift, but it's certainly very, very similar to a piece by Airiam Khachaturian. It's from a suite of music called the Gain Ballet Suite, and it's an adagio.
The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
No, that we said goodbye to everybody this season. Like, anyone who walked off the bridge, like, if you had to go take a leak, they would, like, all stand up and say goodbye. It was, like, pathetic.
The Orb.
Maybe we all need to be comfortable with that discomfort of hearing something that's different from what we think. So instead of attacking, instead of pushing back immediately, we could just let it go. We could say nothing, or we could respond with, that's interesting. That's not how I see it, but I didn't think about it that way either.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out all of these shows and find out what we're talking about in your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe. You can find us everywhere that you get your podcasts. You can also go to the website and stream or download the files. Just look for Trek FM and the name of your favorite show in any podcast app, and we'll come right on up. And if you'd like to contact us, we'd love to hear your thoughts on Star Trek Discovery Season 2 and the things we talked about today. You can go to our website and send us an email at trek.fm/contact. Just use the form that you find there and choose the Ready Room, and that'll come to me by email. Or you can find us on Twitter at TrekFM is our username, or go to Facebook to the Babel Conference, our listeners group. Just type Babel, Babel, and it should come up. But if not, type the whole name, the Babel Conference, and join the group. And we have discussions there about each episode of our podcasts. Now, Larry, I think one reason I couldn't find you on the sofa at the beginning of the show is because you're very, very busy this time of year. So what do you have going on?
Oh, it's convention season coming up, and it's already tour season. No, I've got, we have the Trekland Treks now. We have day tours of film sites around LA, which is a totally customized opportunity that people can see at, I have a treklandtreks.com page. But coming up at the end of June 29th and or 30th, I have a prepackaged event day tours called LA Away Days. And I invite anybody who's coming over. I mean, the other is meant for if you're on business or if you're on vacation and you have a day and you want to do touring, we can set you up. We customize it. But I'm offering this as an event. I'll do that 2 or 3 times in the year. LA Away Days and like away team days. So if you want, your own unique mission of a lifetime and go where they film sites and, bring your cosplay along and photograph and all of that, it's a lot of fun. But, reach out to me. I've got LarryNemecek.com/away days if you want to see that, or just write me or get me on Twitter at Larry Nemecek, or find me, Larry at LarryNemecek.com email. But yeah, it's tour season, and next year we're having the Geek Nation Tour's big LA to Vegas tour before Vegas for 2020. But if you're Vegas bound this year, we are bringing back our one-day Valley of Fire tour, and that's at geeknationtours.com. But otherwise,
it's not the Valley of Shadows tour, right? You're not going to take people around through, and they can't take their own time crystal home, right?
No. It's like take nothing but photographs, leave nothing but your footprints. That does not include time crystals. But you can take your time every Tuesday at 1:00 Pacific. I still am doing my Trekland Tuesdays live, like 45 minutes with a topic, a sermon, and then we have live talkback Q&A, and I follow the Parrot Analytics ratings for digital shows, including Discovery. And when I'm not here with you. And then, of course, right after midnight every Tuesday on the Roddenberry Network and also here on the Trek FM main feed, the Trek Files drops every Tuesday. And that's been a lot of fun with a different guest each week. And we've had some great shows lately, including finding the woman who played the human form of Isis the cat from Assignment Earth. I love making news like that. So, but, LarryNemecek.com is the place to go. Larry Nemecek's Trekland on Facebook and on Instagram, or at Larry Nemecek on Twitter.
Excellent. So really busy, as always. So much stuff coming up. The tours sound fun. I wish I could go on one. Maybe one of these days I'll make it over and can walk through the Valley of Fire.
One of these days, Chris. All we got to do is grab you a time crystal.
That's what I need. Or I can borrow. This is what I really need, is not so much the time crystal. I need Admiral Cornwell's magic door. Then I can just step through and I'll just be there in Los Angeles, in Las Vegas, in the desert in between, wherever I want to be.
We didn't even talk about the blast door, Chris, but
no.
If you're actually going to try to use a Cornwell Iconian door, I might need a blast door from the Enterprise to protect myself. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. All right. But if you'd like to find me, you can find me in terms of podcasting here on the network. I do The Orb, which is our Star Trek Deep Space Nine dedicated podcast, which I co-host with Matthew Rushing. I also do Notes from the Edge, which is a sub-show of The Edge. That's our Star Trek Discovery podcast. On that show, I share my thoughts about each episode and deep dive into the connections between that episode of Discovery and the greater Star Trek franchise. Last season, I did it each week after each episode of Discovery. I wasn't able to do that this year. And so instead, I'm going to be doing them all after and following plot threads through the season, as well as deep diving into connections. And I hope to have some of the first episodes of that out pretty soon. I'm working on it right now. I'm kind of putting them all together at the same time so that I can find those links between plot points and such. So it's taking some time, but that will be coming.
Even more deep divery than we did tonight?
Even more.
Okay.
Much more deep diving than we did tonight, Larry. And you can find my writing about Star Trek on the official website at StarTrek.com. And if you want to catch me in social media, Twitter is the best place. That's where I'm most active. My username there is C. Bryan Jones, the letter C, and Bryan with a Y. That's also my name everywhere in social media. And you can find me on Facebook in the Babel Conference. As I mentioned, that's our listeners group. I'd also like to thank our patrons of Trek FM and of the Ready Room. You guys keep the show going. You keep the network going. Without our patrons, it would not be possible for the network to exist and for us to get these podcasts out to everyone. So a big thank you to Norman C. Lowell, Renee Roberts, Zachary Fruling, Sam Piasek, Kay Elizabeth Shaw, Tim Robertson, David Shuford, and Ju Kim. Thank you so much for supporting the Ready Room, and thank you to all of our patrons for supporting the network. If you would like to become an associate producer on this show or any of our shows, or be involved in the Patrons Roundtable where you can discuss Star Trek just like we did today with some of our hosts, and we publish that out for everyone to listen to, or get access to our patrons' websites, a special website where we do early releases and other things. You can find out everything that you need to know at patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM. And thank you so much to everyone who's supporting us. It really means a lot. And we could not do this without you. Well, Larry, I'm glad we got to talk about season 2, and I'm surprised.
And talk.
Well, we talked, and yet I feel like we only scratched the surface of the things that we could have talked about and wanted to talk about. But anyway, it was fun nevertheless, and I hope people listening enjoyed it, and I'm sure we'll talk more about Discovery in season 2. So thanks for dropping by today.
And you know what? As tempted as I am to go grab a time crystal, because I forgot to mention Portal47.net and my column every issue, a fistful of data in every official Star Trek magazine, I really think it's time to stick some duct tape on it, because the Ready Room is done.